because of not wanting to upset certain people in their constituencies.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons.
But unfortunately, a minority of people in the country, and those are the people that they're pandering to, and that is what is entirely wrong. People are getting really angry about this.
Absolutely.
More angry than they were yesterday.
Vote today, and again, everyone, including people, playing politics. This it's bound to come up at pmqs as well. We'll be talking about this more. Again, I love the fact it's all about Jess Phillips now.
Yeah.
Always all about Jess Phillips.
She's such a great woman. It's so unfair that she's been
I mean, some of the
names.
stuff Elon Musk said was outrageous.
It was. Yeah, it was. But, not as outrageous as what happened.
Yeah.
We'll see you after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Very much appreciate you joining me. Lots and lots, as always, to talk about today. Whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is absolutely fabulous to have you on board. Also delighted to say that Benedict Spence joins me as Conservative commentator. Very much appreciate you joining us here on a Wednesday morning. Lots to talk about, including, of course, this crucially, this vote that's going to be happening later today. Labour MP is going to be whipped to vote against the new national inquiry into grooming gangs. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, is forcing that vote on a national inquiry in an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill. Of course, if Labour vote against it, it falls, no question at all. But, of course, then technically the whole bill would fall if they did vote on it. So we're going to talk about that, what's going to happen there. Also, the NHS very much in the news as more than a dozen hospitals have declared critical instance as the flu outbreak worsens. Health leaders are warning that the NHS is facing exceptionally high demand. It's January, it always does, with the number of cases already around double last year's peak. Health Secretary Wes Streeting says he is ashamed of how some patients are being treated. Plus, we're going to talk more about what Donald Trump had to say in a remarkably lengthy press conference and question and answer session at his Mar-a-Lago home yesterday when he called on NATO members to spend 5% of their GDP on defence and refused to rule out using military force to acquire both Greenland and reacquire the Panama Canal. Extraordinary words. We'll talk about all of that. Plus, Free Gear, Keir Starmer has again accepted more free football tickets. Apparently, last month he accepted another £1,000 worth of Arsenal tickets and corporate hospitality. I mean, does the guy never get the message? All that coming up, plenty more besides. We're not going to lead on the California wildfires, which for some reason major media outlets in this country seem to think is absolutely the only concern of a nation right now. Oh, I'm so worried about some celebrities and rich people with lovely houses in California having to leave their homes because of wildfires, which, by the way, aren't caused by climate change. Just a small note. We'll be talking to a guest about that a little bit later on, but goodness me, the fuss people are making about that. I do want to put the question I want to ask you today. We've talked for 2 days about the grooming scandals, the rape gang scandal, and I'm very, very, very happy to continue to take your calls on that if you want to get in touch about this vote that the Tories are pushing. It's bound to come up at pmqs, but the Tories pushing this vote, basically adding to an already existing bill in the second reading, basically insisting that there should be a public national inquiry into the grooming scandal. Labour are going to whip their MPs against it, but if you want to get in touch on that, is it playing politics? Is not? I'd love to hear from you. But I also want to hear from you on the issue of the NHS. Again, a massive, massive issue for an awful lot of people in this country. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says he is ashamed as patients face 2-day waits at hospital A&Es across the country amid the growing winter flu crisis. Want to know what your reaction is to that? Do give us a call on 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. You can send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls, of course, as usual, charged at the national rate. Text cost one standard network rate message. Do get in touch on any of the stories we're talking about, but particularly interested in hearing from you on the NHS this morning. Benedict Spence, I say welcome once again. I do want to talk to you first, though, about this vote about the grooming gang inquiry. Is this Tories playing party politics for this, or is it Labour playing party politics for this? Or, I don't know, is it just Elon Musk?
It's a bit of all of these things, frankly, because, you know, we can't get away from the fact that actually a lot of this happened on the Tories' watch. It's all very well them now coming out, now that Elon Musk has started talking about it, saying, oh, isn't it disgraceful? But as with so many things for the Conservatives, you can sort of very happily sit there and go, yes, it is disgraceful, and you were in power for how long? And this was known about when? Come on, you know, nobody's taking that seriously. But again...
the Tories saying, oh, well, you know, but the last inquiry, the J inquiry, didn't really do to Well, yeah.
Whose inquiry was that?
Yes, exactly.
But again, Labour sort of, you know, battening down the hatches, whipping MPs not to vote for an inquiry. Keir Starmer coming out and saying that it's being spread by sort of far-right agitators. This is incredibly bad politics. And, you know, to sort of sit there and say to Labour MPs, look, I don't really care how you feel about the rape and abuse and torture and, in some cases, murder of young, vulnerable girls. You're going to vote against looking into this. I mean, just what was going through the mind?
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, you can absolutely see the Tories, the memes on social media. This is going to be brought up, you know, the next elections, or the local elections even, in the what they reckon 50-plus towns and cities across the country where people suspect that this is going on a grand scale, and still going on, by the way. It's not something that happened in the past. This isn't like the sort of a care home scandal from the past. This is going on right now as well. It's not a good look. I was in two minds about whether there should be an independent inquiry, not on the basis that they cost a lot of money, they take an awful lot of time. Are we going to learn anything new? But actually, you know, with the whistleblowers and many of the victims saying they do need one, when you realise how little it has been looked into, you cannot possibly have local inquiries. Also, how can you have 50 towns doing local inquiries? It's local authorities, local police, local bosses who've basically blocked the prosecution of these grooming gangs, these rape gangs in the first place. So, of course, it needs to be someone who's come from outside. But but also, the fact that a 7-year inquiry into all manner of child abuse, including in the church, in care homes, that they spent 10 days on the grooming gangs. That's not an inquiry into grooming gangs.
Of course it's not. This is, and it's happening, it's alleged to have happened on a scale that is unfathomable, I think, to most people. That's what's causing a lot of the anger, is that, it was bad enough when they thought, oh, it might just be 3 or 4 towns in isolation, but 50 potentially? I mean, that's just, it's mind-blowing. And to then sort of say, well, that doesn't necessarily, come on, we have inquiries for all sorts of things. This is child rape.
Yeah, exactly. But also, and it was fascinating yesterday to watch the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. OK, to be fair, he was a Home Office Minister in the last government. So, I mean, again, they've all got, guilt on their hands in terms of failure to get anything done. But these things do fundamentally come down to Prime Ministers getting... These aren't announced by junior ministers. Jess Phillips doesn't decide whether or not there's an inquiry into grooming scandals, and neither does Chris Philp. But the reality is, he stood up in the Parliament yesterday and said it is not far right to say that you want to have a full inquiry of the grooming gang scandal, and he was booed by Labour MPs.
Of course he was.
Again, not a good look.
Of course he was. But
not a good look.
But that's because many Labour MPs fundamentally they take the attitude that community relations in a multicultural society is more important than looking into these things. That's their first and foremost view. And many of them also have very large bodies of constituents in their local constituencies who don't want people to look into this because, of course, they know people who might be implicated in this. Jess Phillips is another very good example of this.
Well,
now a government minister who, very narrow majority at the last general election, was heckled at the hustings.
And she called out, it was men. She called out men heckling her.
She doesn't have the courage.
Which men were they, Jeff? Who was it, and why were they heckling you?
She doesn't have the courage to call a spade because she wants to keep her seat. And that's when we've got to that stage, I'm afraid. And, we had this, of course, with the Gaza vote last year. The suggestion that people were intimidating MPs, but we can't possibly say who that is because that might hurt community tensions. Honestly, when you've got to that stage where elected members of Parliament are saying, oh, I'm scared, but I'm not going to name who it is, but Elon Musk is the bad guy, come on, we're not taking this seriously.
Elon Musk has said some outrageous stuff about Jess Phillips, calling her a rape genocide apologist, and she should be in jail. I mean, it's inaccurate, it's outrageous. I mean, the man has got to get a grip, frankly. I mean, God, I'm getting a load of abuse because I'm criticising Elon Musk for what he said, and it's like, seriously, from a bunch of completely ignorant Americans who haven't got a clue. Apparently, I'm very establishment and have totally been on the side of the grooming gangs all this time. I mean, sod off, frankly. You don't comment on stuff you don't know about. It's a top tip here. But I mean, I have to say, lots of interviews with Jess Phillips from the Beth Rigbys and the Victoria Derbyshires and the usual sort of hand wringing. Oh, a woman Labour MP has faced death threats abuse. Now look, it is horrific. No one should get death threats. No one should face abuse. No one in elected office should ever, or running for elected office should ever be criticised or being criticised. They should absolutely be criticised, but threatened and intimidated in any way at all. And there have been arrests made. But again, and she did say, I mean, to credit, she did say that the few days of madness that she's had is nothing compared to the decades sat in police stations with girls bleeding from a battering they've taken from a grooming gang. So I'll put on my big girl pants and just suck it up. But at the end of the day, the government isn't doing enough. The last government didn't do enough. No government's done enough. And the Tories have been, I think, just as bad over the years. Perhaps not under Kemi Badenoch, perhaps not, and people like Robert Jenrick speaking out, but they've been just as bad over the years, saying, oh, we think there's a bit of a problem, and not actually doing anything about it. At the end of the day, if you're not prosecuting the people who committed these crimes, if you're not prosecuting and holding to account the people who covered up and allowed these crimes to continue, and if you're not preventing these crimes from carrying on, I don't really care what you say. I think that this is really emblematic of the lack of seriousness, both in Britain's political class and its media class, that actually what people find really disagreeable is what Elon Musk says. Now, I agree with you, he's sort of overstepped the line, but come on. I can't remember, was it Lewis Goodall who said he's very dangerous or something? Yeah. Yes, the man who runs the world's largest private intercontinental ballistic missile program is dangerous because he says things on Twitter. No, we've got our priorities completely wrong, and it's what he says that matters. He's pointing out a failure of the British state to protect the most vulnerable people. It's he is a loose cannon. He is a complete loose cannon. He really is. However, I mean, again, it did come back in the news because of him. That the announcement on some of the safeguarding measures that Yvette Cooper announced the other night, that wouldn't have happened right now. It really wouldn't have. Exactly. What do you make on the vote today? There, do you think Labour are going to vote against it? Tories are going to. Both sides are going to whip for or against. Who do you think is going to come out of this looking worse, such as the politics matter over and above, which of course it doesn't, the safety of young girls? The government is going to whip its MPs to vote against.
And so they will vote against, and they will be the ones that come out looking worse. Because how on earth can you morally sit there and say that your feelings on the abuse of children are secondary to the interests of the government? I'm sorry, no.
Yeah.
Government exists to uphold laws and to protect your rights and your security. That means national security, it means policing.
Yeah.
If you're failing to protect the most vulnerable, you have failed as a government.
Can we also just linked to this? People talk about the genocide. Another stabbing on the streets of London. Well, on a London bus. A 14-year-old boy stabbed to death on a bus at 2:30 in the afternoon. First day back at school for most kids yesterday in the capital city. I think around most of the country as well. Stabbed to death. Now it looks like. Again, looks like it's one of those gang things. It turns out he's a rapper. He raps about knives and guns and, miming the trigger pulling and, another one of the, you can go, it's wrong uns killing wrong uns, broad daylight, on public transport. Absolutely terrifying, I think, for most parents. Certainly they thought, my kid might have been on that bus.
Yeah.
And, it could have happened, it could have happened to you, get involved in it. But don't worry, of course, because we've got the Met Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, nice at knighthood. Now we've got the London Mayor, who's a police crime commissioner for London, sets the budget, the policing priorities and things. Now Sir Sadiq Khan. Do you think those knighthoods are going to make Britain's streets and public transport safer for our teenagers this year?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's probably the closest that any of them are going to get to a bladed weapon, actually, given the circumstances. There's a real lack of sort of hands-on approach to this. I mean, look, I know you and I disagree on the severity of the punishment for this sort of thing, but I don't think it's going to cut through until a knife means life. And I do mean carrying that. And I do mean a couple of young boys will have to go to prison for a very long time for the rest of them to get the message.
Look, they're not scared of prison. They're scared of the other kid with a knife.
I'm sorry. They will be when it's their classmates getting dragged off and taken to prison and they suddenly realise what the severity of this is.
But it is interesting, isn't it, when the Southport riots, the reaction to that was all about, you have to show, instantly, you've got to be very, very clear with your, we're showing, tough crime, tough criminal action, but not when it comes to knife crime. I mean, the number of teenagers killed on Britain's streets, particularly in London, I have to say, if you picture who you think the victim looks, what the victim looks like, and you picture in your head what you think, we haven't got a suspect yet, who the suspect looks like, you're probably right. I mean, I'm just saying it. If you're picturing it, not allowed to say it, but statistically, if you look at the pictures and you make a guess, you'll be right.
The same week that the riots erupted in the aftermath of Southport, there was a running battle between gangs in Southend
with machetes,
between groups of boys with machetes, and that's the real sort of juxtaposition in this country. People, can be punished in many cases rightly for anger, for in response to an act that happened somewhere, but if people can arm themselves and fight in the street on CCTV
daylight,
and the authorities can go, well, we got choices of what we can go after, and we're going to go after this group, not that one.
Well, there was a Hurty tweet we need to go and attend.
Absolutely.
This thing, there is a real sense, and I don't think it's made up in people's heads, that our streets are not safe. Our streets are not safe. They really do not feel safe. There are certainly places where I say to my daughter, I don't want you, even near we live in a nice area, don't walk past like that school or,
the King's Road. Ooh. Can't be going
do not
down
live
there.
anywhere near fancy schmancy places like that. Let's talk about the A&E though, because you might think you're safe in hospital. Apparently not, because you won't get treated. We are looking at 2-day waits, 50-hour waits in more than 9 hospitals across the country. We've had emergencies declared, the usual winter crisis declared in more than 12 hospitals. At Liverpool saw the first one we've heard announced. Apparently fewer than most years. Yay, well done, everybody. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has said he's ashamed of how some patients are treated in the NHS. Now, I've got family members, I mentioned before, a family member who had a broken pelvis, was on a corridor for more than corridor trolley for more than 24 hours. He's 6'5". That was not a fun experience. And that was in the middle of the summer, by the way. So, we go from winter crisis to winter crisis for decades. Now we go from winter crisis to spring crisis, summer crisis, autumn crisis, winter crisis, are back again. Now we're told we need to be worried about this new, not as new, it's another one of those viruses, HMPV virus. I've got to be honest, I don't have time for another pandemic. I'm busy, I've got stuff to do, I've got places to be, but it's spreading in China, concern there. But people say, there's pictures of these wards in China looking like they're overcrowded. You think, that just looks like my local A&E on a Saturday night. I don't know what the issue is. Should Wes Streeting be ashamed of how some patients are treated?
I mean, of course he should. He's the health secretary, and this is his remit. I wouldn't necessarily say it's his fault. I don't think he's been in place long enough for this to be considered his fault, and this has been growing for a long time.
When will it be his fault?
I think, well, this is the thing. I think give it a year or two, and if there's not been sort of tangible progress, because it's unforgivable that actually every year there is a winter crisis, and, oh, we didn't see this coming, please don't go outside. There's this thing called flu that none of us have ever heard about before, and it really affects old people, and so does the temperature. Who could have possibly foreseen this? You know, the inability to sort of intercept this, and also to make sure that there are enough staff, you know, the inability to spot, oh, this is the time of the year when most people take time off. We might want to try and incentivize people not take time off.
This is like bank tellers taking lunch breaks between sort of 12 and 2. It's like, no, that's when people, I mean, if you have a bank that's open near you, I mean, probably, I'm thinking 10 years ago now, it's like, you know, when I waitressed, funnily enough, we didn't take our dinner break, you know, between the hours of 6 and 9.
Yeah.
Funnily enough. I mean, it's when other people are... But that's the thing. Well, you know, I'm really sorry if you work in healthcare. We're really not sure we want you to be off for a lot of December and January. Yeah, there should be rules about it, actually, that people don't take time off. And as much as people might go, well, that's desperately unfair, I'm sorry, you chose to become a medic, and you chose to become a medic because it's well paid and there's a lot of prestige behind it. You know, there are some trade-offs that come with that. Yeah. But, you know, on the question of staffing, it will take a bit of time for that to filter through, because this country doesn't actually train enough medics and it doesn't retain enough medics. It's a conscious decision.
Yeah, it's a conscious decision, even though we have more than enough resources and we have more than enough talent.
But don't worry, we're training lots of people from China and India and Nigeria.
We have more Ghanaians working in the NHS than there are Ghanaian medics working in Ghana, because we just think, oh, that's fine, you can just strip mine third world countries because they'll work for less. I'm sure that's a sustainable method.
I mean, my question to you today specifically is about the Health Secretary saying he's ashamed as patients face 2-day waits in hospital A&Es across the country amid the growing winter flu crisis. What's the reaction? Is it, well, same old, same old? Should he be ashamed? When do you think that it will actually be Labour's responsibility that we've got failing health service? You know, or is it going to be like always, well, Tories, you know, austerity, blah, blah, blah. I want to hear from you, your experiences. I want to hear from you if you work in the NHS, if you had any experience recently. Do get in touch. Or maybe just feel like, you know, again, I'm just, you know, I'd love to hear about your thoughts about this virus, and should we be concerned? Because, oh my God, the media are ramping up to get themselves, you know, oh, let's demand some more lockdowns. You know that's what's coming. They're desperate for it. They all loved it. Honestly, the political journalists absolutely loved not having to go into the Commons and getting shouted out by bosses. They got to stay at home all day in their lovely homes. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. That's 0344 499 1000. Of course, also very happy to get your calls on this vote today about the grooming gang inquiry. A Labour right to up against it, the Tories right to push it. Is this basically politicking? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Coming up, we're going to take a quick break. We'll get to some of your calls. I also want to talk about Donald Trump, who extraordinarily said yesterday that he won't rule out military force to take back the Panama Canal and seize Greenland as well. He also called on NATO members to boost their defence spending to 5% of GDP. Given most don't even hit the 2% mark, we struggle with that and are struggling to even talk about a target of 2.5%. Is he right or wrong? Love to hear your thoughts on that as well. As I say, the number to call on any of the big topics, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Because we know in this country that for many, many years, and hopefully this is going away, the moment that finger pointed and you're accused of being racist, it is like being called a witch 300 years ago. The more you say, the more guilty you are. And this is all the establishment are in that pattern. And they were prepared to see girls abused rather than the racist accusation being made. We live in a country where racism is allegedly a more serious crime than child rape. That's how crazy it is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'll take some of your calls and messages coming in about the NHS. Don't forget, do get in touch, of course, about any of the topics we're talking about today, including the grooming gang inquiry vote today. Is it politicking by Tories to push that vote? Is it politicking by Labour to refuse to vote for the grooming inquiry? Do get in touch, 0344 499 1000. Benedict Spence is still with me. Benedict, I know you're desperate to talk about this before we go to call. It's Donald Trump and this extraordinary press conference he gave. President-elect, not even president yet, and we've got a couple of weeks to go on that. But he spoke on wide-ranging subjects, did he not, at home and abroad? But let's have a listen to what he had to say about NATO, first of all.
Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, you know, they're in dangerous territory. I think it should be, they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%. I'm the one that got them to pay 2%.
Well, I mean, he's quite right that countries in NATO need to up their military spending. I'm never sure why everyone thinks that we should just go, oh, we'll just carry on spending what we want to spend on the NHS or other things, green nonsense, but we'll expect American taxpayers to fund our defences.
Yeah, but there is an ulterior motive to this, which is that most NATO countries, the bulk of their defence spending actually goes to American arms companies. Yeah. So when he says, I want you to spend X amount of money, what he's saying is, I would like you to give me more money. And that's actually why a lot of NATO countries decide not to spend as much, because they look at it as a subsidy for the US military, which of course, you know, it has better deals with all of these companies, which it then...
Well, if we had better military ourselves, which had better defence, you know, military procurement and indeed
which we don't.
Industry, well, we should.
Well, the problem with that is, of course, then you've got different countries' arms industries competing with each other, whereas the United States doesn't have to compete with itself. So, you know, they have special legislation, which means that, you know, a company in Arkansas has to get a certain amount of defence contracts, and another one in Idaho does, whereas a Polish one has to compete with an Italian one, and that's where the problems lie. It makes much more sense to them buy from the US because it's subsidised by Congress.
Also,
but that money it does work. Well, no, actually, we're quite good. This is the sad thing, is that German, Polish, Italian, oddly enough, military engineering is pretty good. British military engineering is quite good. We just don't buy very much.
But he is certainly right that we need to be spending more than 2%. And lots of countries in NATO still don't even hit the 2% mark. When he was president before, he talked about this, and people go, ha, ha, ha. Oh, well, you know, then Ukraine happened. You know, how's that working out for you, Germany and other countries? Very interesting. Any country that actually has a border with Russia, they've been very, very, very clear, haven't they, about spending more than 2%.
Germany doesn't have a border anymore.
We have a target, apparently, for the Tories had announced and Labour talking about, of getting to 2.5%. I mean, about 0.5% of ours, percentage of GDP on defence is on pensions and things, which are very important, but in no way help our fighting forces out right now. I'm of the view that we are going to end up spending 5%, whether we like it or not. Probably better to do it now and get our money's worth now rather than doing it in a blind panic in 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of our equipment is out of date, and we've seen this with the Trident. Only half of our Trident nuclear submarines actually work, and the ones that are out at sea are being so massively overstretched that when we actually run tests on them, they fail the tests. That's a really bad...
And then we're told, but it's a good thing we've done the test because we found out they don't work. Yeah, but only if you actually mend the darn things after.
Exactly, the airbag's slow, but this is what the
this
test
was
is
something
for.
I thought was much more extraordinary in relation to Ukraine. This, to me, sounds exactly like what exactly the same arguments that Vladimir Putin gives about why he had to invade Ukraine, which, of course, he believes is already, in a Russian territory, as of course it once was, Soviet territory. But this is what Donald Trump had to say in response to a reporter asking about both Greenland and Panama.
Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China.
God, I love the way he says China. China. I think you have to have the little fingers as well. China. But I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, I think he actually thinks that Greenland is as big as it looks on those flat maps. It's not. It's about the size of Algeria. I looked up. It's like, what's the country it's closest? It looks like it's the size of Africa. It's not. It's the size of just one country in Africa. Now, Panama Canal was built by the Americans.
Yeah.
And then it was Jimmy Carter, wasn't it? He was president. That he basically, handed it back to the Panamanians. But in no way do the Americans not have control. America controls the high seas around the globe. So, but this is him being Putin.
The point that he's making, I think, is that were there to be a war, and this is to do with China, then global trade choke points would be very important. And we know this because the United States is taking a great interest in who controls the Straits of Manila, which is why the Chinese are now trying to build a railway across across Thailand so that it doesn't have to worry about a US
The ability
blockade.
to ship trade, but also international trade. And Panama Canal is absolutely crucial in that, not having to go all the way down the bottom of South America, but also, crucially, shipping fuel, shipping oil.
And a lot of Latin American countries, even though the US has a huge interest in that part of the world, countries like Venezuela, for instance, have very close ties to, say, China. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that China would be able to have a bit of a tinker with the Panama Canal were a conflict to break out. Greenland, though, I actually think is much more interesting. Do you know what Greenland has?
Well, it's fossil fuels underneath.
Not fossil fuels.
No?
Some of the world's largest uranium deposits.
Ah.
Yeah, huge amounts of uranium deposits, which the Danish government has only recently, because of course it's a very difficult legal setup between Greenland and Denmark, who actually has control. And there's a massive independence movement, ironically, in Greenland. It has huge amounts of not just fossil fuels, but some of the world's largest uranium deposits, but very difficult to get to, except, of course, global warming is going to make it really easy to get to. But also rare earth minerals. The largest deposits in the world are in China, not controlled by China.
But it's the idea
and the
the
second
Americans
largest are in Greenland.
But the idea the Americans are saying, well, we want it. Well, no, that's not how it works.
But this is what's going to happen, though. And they've taken, this is Trump, he has taken the lead, I think, on Russia and Ukraine, but also what China is doing in the South China Sea. But another area of real interest in this, and this might sound a bit niche, is actually Antarctica, the British Antarctic territory, where the Russians have just discovered, where they shouldn't have been, but we don't have the capacity to police them, the world's largest deposits of oil outside of Saudi Arabia. A lot of stuff is in Antarctica, and the US and China and Russia and all of these countries are taking a real interest at the exact moment that Britain has decided we're going to start giving away things like the Chagos Islands.
Don't make it worse. Don't make it worse. For the love of God, don't make it worse. Thank you very much indeed, Benedict Spencer, on all of that. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Particular question I'm asking there is Health Secretary saying he's ashamed as patients are waiting 2-day waits at hospital A&Es across the country amid a growing winter fuel crisis. Your reaction to that? Well, Neil is on the line from Buckinghamshire. He's called in on 0344 499 1000 to have his say. A very good morning to you, Neil. What do you make of Wes Streeting saying this?
Well, he should be, because he's been in opposition for so long. He knows exactly what happens every year. Yeah. And apparently they had a plan. It was all costed, but all they are doing is consultation.
Yeah.
So he should take the blame, because he should have had, when he first job came in, right, this is what we're going to do. what happens at New Year? Oh, we have a crisis.
Yep.
Let's get a plan in action. He's done absolutely
They knew
nothing.
to go. But also, one of the key things we've always been told for, like a decade plus, is social care is the issue. If you don't start social care, older people getting ill, going into hospital where they wouldn't need to, and then you can't get them out of hospital. They're bed blocking, so you can't get people into A&E or treated and moved from A&E into another hospital bed because those beds are blocked. That's a circular thing. But they just said, we're going to have another review about social care.
The thing is, when I was growing up, we had a little thing called cottage hospitals.
Yeah.
And that's where all the older people went to, all the bed blockers. Now, if they got those, they could have had all those, make a Nightingale a cottage hospital.
Yeah.
Get the older people out. You don't need all the nurses.
The round-the-clock care, yeah.
Exactly. And that would free up how many thousands of beds?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a crisis.
It is distressing, but again, I just think the NHS management, I think in lots of hospitals, but certainly at the very top, Amanda Pritchard, I think they're just utterly incompetent. I really, really do. I just think these are just sort of, career people who really haven't got a clue, got no big ideas, and I don't think anyone's going to be able to turn around this monolith. But there we are. Neil, thank you very much indeed. Well, he certainly thinks that Frank Westminster should have had a proper plan when he came into place. Winter is always a surprise to both politicians and the NHS, isn't it? Love to hear your experiences. Do get in touch on this and all the big topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we'll talk to our former NHS Trust Chairman, our friend of the show, Roy Lilly, about the NHS. We're also going to be talking about the politicking over the grooming gangs with a former Labour Special Advisor. I wonder if I'll be called far right again today. Always something to look forward to. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:37 is the time. Benedict Spence is still with me and still getting your calls coming in, particularly about whether or not the Health Secretary should be ashamed as patients face two-day waits at hospital A&Es across the country amid the growing winter flu crisis. Your reaction to that, 0344 499 1000. Do get in touch. Let's go to Roy Lilly now. He's a former NHS Trust Chairman, friend of the show, and joins us now. A very happy New Year to you, Roy.
And a happy New Year to you,
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, another January. Another winter flu crisis. What a surprise. Only time we didn't get one was during COVID, when, of course, no one was allowed to see each other. So flu didn't spread. It was just overtaken by COVID. Flu's been back with a vengeance ever since COVID. Everyone I know has been ill, frankly, whether it's this HMPV or whether it's flu or rhinovirus or COVID, who knows? Everyone I know has been feeling rotten, coughs and colds and what. But we know, of course, that these diseases do impact elderly people in particular the most. When the Health Secretary says he's ashamed that patients are waiting such long time at hospital A&Es, and it's more than a dozen hospitals, should he be?
Well, they've been in office for about 6 months, haven't they, really? They've had 14 years to get ready for office. I mean, in fairness, I suppose in reality, they've had 3 or 4 years to develop current and meaningful plans for the future of the NHS. And I must say that I was surprised that they're going to take until the spring to develop a plan for the NHS, and then there's going to be a whole load of consultation and mucking about. Then it's got to be funded, so it's got to be plugged into the next financial cycle. So, yes, I mean, frankly...
that was just government speak for it's not happening for a while.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and they just kind of kicked it in the long grass because they didn't know what to do. I mean, that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is the NHS has worked on its winter plan for this year back in June. I mean, it was published in July, circulated, consulted on, and signed, sealed, and delivered. So people were ready for it. What has happened that I think has caught everybody unawares is that we've got now the confluence of novavirus, which can be very dangerous in vulnerable people. We've had the COVID, which is still very virulent and running around. We've had flu and RSV. Now, most of those have got, not with novavirus, but the rest of them have got vaccinations. A couple of things have happened with that. Inexplicably, the vaccine period normally starts in September. It didn't start until October last year. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. I've never met anybody that does. It's the job for the Health Protection Agency to try and do that. They took over the role of public health. I mean, they're not a great organisation, I'm afraid, and they've come under a lot of criticism. So we've got that. Big chunk of people who normally get vaccines have been left out this year, the 50 to the 65s. And they're quite important, and they're important because if you're 50, you're likely to have an elderly relative. Your mum or dad's likely to be 70, and you're likely to be a granddad. And kids are super spreaders around this as well. So not vaccinating them, it's not that they can't cope with the flu or whatever. It's them spreading it. That's part of the problem.
Now, does the flu vaccine prevent you from getting it? That's what we were told with COVID, and it wasn't the case. Yes. Or is it to prevent you from getting seriously ill with it?
Well, all vaccinations work the same way. They prepare your body with antibodies so it knows what to expect. So if you do pick it up, sometimes you don't even know you've had it and you breeze through it. And other people, it just ameliorates the symptoms. And
but that's not the same as. But again, that's if you got it but you don't know you've got it and you feel fine, just have a bit of a sniffle, you can still then pass it on to your elderly relatives.
Only some of the antibodies. Yes, I mean it's a complex thing. The real thing that we don't do, I think, is and you won't want to hear this, but the way to deal with these infections is they're all mostly, apart from novavirus, they're mostly airborne, and they're transmitted through droplets, and you know what
we should all lock down.
Well, no, I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is there should have been greater emphasis on ventilating premises, which the government haven't done, and there should be some sensible advice on wearing masks in public transport and crowded places.
Oh, for goodness sake, I've seen those mask lunatics. You know, as I do, this has been so well documented. The reasons why people were not advised to wear masks before, because it doesn't make a difference, because the droplets stay in the air. It's all, it's just a load of nonsense. It's an illusion.
It is not the case that masks don't work. It's the case that there is no silver bullet. it's the case that there's silver buckshot and there was a whole load of things you can do. I mean, the only public health messages that I've seen this year, perhaps you've seen different ones, is to wash your hands, which is important, certainly for novavirus.
I think people should be doing that more often anyway. I was one decent thing that might have come out of the madness of the last few years is people washing their hands more. I'd get the train in and out of the office every day. My God, the state of some people, you know, sneezing into their hands and then holding onto the rail. It's absolutely disgusting. But
well,
look,
all of those things are
but listen, that's never one forgotten common sense, which is like, I've got some elderly relatives. I mean, you know, look, I'm a super spread. I work in an office with a load of young people. I've got a teenage daughter who knows everyone in North London. I've got 2 nephews at nursery school, age 3. I mean, if there is a bug going around the capital city, hello, Julia's going to catch it and I'm going to pass it on. But no, I don't go and see my elderly aunt when I've got a really bad cold or not, even just a cold. I don't even know. I don't test for what it is because I don't want to pass it on to her. That's just about people being sensible. And people used to know how to do this stuff before.
Julia, people are not sensible, are they? That's the trouble.
Well, then, you know.
Well, listen, that's
Darwin at work, isn't it?
Look, we can kind of postulate around what people should do and what they shouldn't do. The NHS can only work with what it can work with. It had a plan. It was fully funded. Nobody expected the confluence of 4
Nobody expected there was going to be a resurgence of various different bugs during winter. I mean, I expected it.
No one expected when the winter plans were drawn up. Nobody expected that we would have the 4 very virulent infections running at the same time.
But shouldn't the NHS plan? I mean, and again, it's like no one expects a particular terror attack, but you have plans in place to deal with it.
Let me finish a sentence, please. Right, the NHS is running at about 90% plus occupancy all of the time.
That's the problem. Yeah.
We don't have the capacity. You know, we've done all this before. You know, you do the comparisons with this health system and all the other health systems. You know, we don't have the capacity. So the NHS runs at the best of times well over 90% capacity. World Health Organization, the College of Emergency Medicine say it should be down around 80%. Right, it's not. So when you get something like this happening, you haven't got anywhere to put anybody. So they end up in a corridor or what have you. The idea is to keep the emergency things that people are declaring now. What happens is you stop everything else in the hospital, focus on the front door, sorting people out in A&E, and focus on the back door to get people home. Now, the front door bit works quite well. Getting people out is the difficult bit, because you mentioned it in the introduction to this piece, that social care is completely knackered. I mean, if you think the NHS is having a tough time, have a look at social care. There isn't a plan for social care. Streeting's now saying it's going to be 2028 before there's a sort of developed, mature plan to deal with social care. And in the meantime, the NHS is stuffed up with people. It can't cope. They're generally, most people with, you know, flu, novavirus, all the rest of it, adults, they sort of kind of struggle through. But if you're elderly, you've got diabetes, COPD, other frailties, it exacerbates what you've got. And so instead of, you know, getting someone with the flu coming in, you get someone with the flu with respiratory difficulties, their oxygen stats are down, you get your stats down, everything else goes wrong. I mean, people come in with very complicated medical problems, and then you run out of medical beds. When you run out of medical beds, what do? Well, you stack people, or you say, let's put them in surgical beds. If you put them in surgical beds, you have to cancel waiting lists. What's the big pressure, the big political pressure in the NHS? Waiting lists. So what do you do then? You stack them in the corridor. Then you put them in. I mean, there is a, I heard the other night that they've turned a boardroom into a ward in one hospital. So, you know, you've got, the NHS takes it on the chin for this, but it can only do with what it's got. It needs, you know, an investment over a period. It needs to sort out the issues of the capacity that it's got, and you just can't do it overnight.
No, I know you can't do it overnight, but again, I think a lot of people expected Labour did, you know, have more of a plan than they appeared to have. Roy, we'll have to leave it there. I really appreciate you joining us. Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chairman. Benedict Spence, I mean, you know, Westminster says he's ashamed, but, you know, he's only been in power 6 months.
Yeah.
You can't turn around a juggernaut like the NHS in 6 months. But it does seem to me, well, yeah, but the NHS chief exec's not just been in for 6 months. She's useless.
True, and I do think that it's going to require some very difficult decisions. I do think Labour will have the political capital to get away with that in the way that the Tories don't. But if we don't see actual progress this time next year, then I think it's fair enough to actually go in two-footed on West Streeting. As you say, he should have had a plan in place from the get-go.
Let's stop being surprised that we get a whole load of viruses, but there we are. The time is 10:48. Up next, we're going to be talking to Paul Richards, former Labour Party Special Advisor, about whether or not it's the Tories or Labour who are playing politics with the victims of grooming gangs over this vote in the Commons later today. Love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:51 is the time. Let's talk right now to Paul Richards, former Labour Special Advisor, about the big vote going on in the House of Commons later today. Very good morning to you, Paul.
Hello, Julia. How are you?
Doing very well indeed. Thanks very much for joining us. Labour is going to whip their MPs to vote against a vote today, an amendment to the bill, the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, going through Parliament, a very worthwhile bill in protecting children, which is being forced by Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, basically to bring in a national inquiry into the grooming and rape gangs across the country. Who's playing politics? Is Keir Starmer playing politics, or is Kemi Badenoch? Or no one?
I think the Tories are playing politics with this because this is obviously a bill that's going through Parliament and being scrutinised in the normal way. And then this amendment has popped up in the last 48 hours as a stunt, really, Julia, just to try and put the government on the back foot, because Kemi Badenoch thinks that there's an argument to be made for a national inquiry, another national inquiry into grooming gangs. But of course, it was her government that set up the very wide-ranging investigation and inquiry a few years ago, which Suella Braverman, for example, as Home Secretary, welcomed. And what this government is saying is that there will be an inquiry. Of course, there should be, but it should be led locally.
No, they haven't. No,
so that's the argument.
No, they haven't said there will be an inquiry. They said local councils can lead inquiries. But given that, I mean, this is the thing that sparked Elon Musk's interest in this matter, on which I believe he's now tweeted something like 200 times, criticising Keir Starmer, Jess Phillips, and others. A letter from Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister responsible for safeguarding, telling a local council, oh no, you should have a local inquiry. But if it's local officials, local councillors, local police chiefs, local social workers, and NHS chiefs who actually failed to tackle wide-ranging grooming and rape gangs and covered it up, I don't see how anyone could think that local people should be in charge of any investigations of that, which is why people are talking about a national one. But you use the word stunt. Is it a stunt to call for an inquiry into such a serious and widespread crime that has led to so much harm and even the deaths of some girls?
Well, just on the locally led issue, of course, previous local-led inquiries in Telford and Rotherham did unearth truth, and they did hold people to account, and they did get to the guts on behalf of the victims, who are the most important people in all of this. So there's nothing wrong with that locally led approach, which is why the government has taken its view that it has. Is it a stunt? Well, this is an opposition that when they were all ministers a few weeks ago, held exactly the same position as the current minister. Yep. So they've suddenly changed their minds 100% because they sent blood, egged on by Mr. Musk, who you've mentioned, who I think is not very well. I think I would worry about his well-being at the moment. The amount of time he is spending on Twitter. If that was a teenager, you'd tell him to go for a walk around the block. And so anyway, egged on by this guy, and they think this is a way to make some political capital. But you know, the chair of the original inquiry has said we don't need another inquiry. Many of the victims are saying, well, look, what we need is to get on with implementing the recommendations.
Absolutely. And there was a failure to implement the recommendations by the Tories. They've said, Robert Jenrick and others have said, oh, we were in the process of, it was 2 years. They had plenty of time to do it. It wasn't a priority. I completely accept the failings of the Tory government on this one. But you know as well as I do, the Lexis J inquiry wasn't into grooming gangs. It was to widespread different child abuse. They spent in 7 years only 10 days looking at the grooming gang specifically, didn't look at any of the specific towns where it had been a particular issue that had been raised, saying, oh, well, it's already been looked at elsewhere. There hasn't been a proper national inquiry. People haven't been held to account. Most of the people who mostly turned a blind eye or helped cover up these crimes haven't ever been arrested, haven't faced any charges, haven't even been publicly exposed. So clearly something needs to be done. And if many of the whistleblowers and the victims are saying this is what we want, seems to me Labour, you lot bloody love an inquiry and a review. You've announced about 50 reviews in the last 6 months since you come into office. So all you do most of the time rather than actually getting anything done. This is something that does need a proper inquiry. It does need to be statutory. It does need to have people giving evidence under oath on a national basis to get the answers to help protect children in the here and now and in the future. Why, of all topics, is this a stunt, but every other inquiry and review isn't?
Well, I would say there is going to be an inquiry. It'll be led by Oldham if they go down that route. Now, that's the right way
that's
for
not
the
a
victims to be heard and for people to be held to account. We have had a national inquiry. It cost £200 million, took 7 years.
It wasn't into grooming gangs.
Endless amounts of testimony.
It wasn't into grooming gangs. No, I'm sorry. It wasn't into grooming gangs. It was into child abuse and care.
Gangs, though, Julia.
10 days. 7 years of evidence. 10 days.
Grooming gangs.
10 days. Even Maggie Oliver, the woman who, the former Manchester detective who blew the whistle on what happened in Rochdale, even she wasn't called to give evidence. And you're telling me we've had an inquiry into grooming gangs? Give me a break.
I think it was thorough, and I think it was wide-ranging, and it included other areas. For example, the Catholic Church.
Yes, exactly. That's what it mostly looked at.
Other children's homes, youth offending institutions. You know,
yes.
This is where the abuse
It wasn't about grooming gangs.
and it was included grooming gangs, and the victims' voices were heard within that, which is why they're saying, look, get on with the implementation of the recommendations now. It's all very well talking, but we need to put some laws in place so this kind of thing just does not happen again. And there were plenty of arrests. There are people currently serving custodial sentences for these heinous crimes. There's
well, they've been sentenced to 10 years and then come out after 5.
Andy Burnham's doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there aren't enough people being arrested. There aren't enough people being prosecuted. There aren't enough people who are going behind bars. They're not going for long enough, I think most people would have to say. But
I completely agree with that. I mean, that's why, again, the focus should be on the police investigations and arrests and convictions, but not necessarily yet another talking shop. You know, Oldham can lead this. They can get to the truth, and that should lead to these perpetrators being arrested and charged.
Let me ask you...
and then banged up, which is what we all want to see.
Well, banged up for, I would say, for life for some of these people. I don't know why people are coming out of 5 years and are roaming the streets again. And also should be deported if they're of dual nationality. You know, bye-bye, thanks for coming, but we don't need you anymore. Just finding, and this feels like a very light, silly topic when you're talking about girls being raped, for goodness sake, which is far more important. But Free Gear Keir has been at it again. According to his register of interest, he has accepted yet another set of Arsenal tickets last month, £1,000 worth of hospitality at the Emirates Stadium. I mean, when is this man who is earning well into a good 6-figure salary, when is he going to just start paying for his own football tickets?
Well, I quite like the fact we've got a PM that goes and watches football.
Well,
I think
how
he's
fabulous and working
it's
class.
His great passion. I think it would be terribly sad if he stopped going because he's the Prime Minister. I think
he doesn't have to stop going, but he can pay for his own tickets. My daughter was at the Arsenal last night. She paid for her own tickets, and she's 18. If she can afford it, how come he can't?
Well, if people want to host him and he's the Prime Minister, then...
Oh, he's the Prime Minister. He should get everything for free.
I don't think there's any problem with him saying...
Does he get his Waitrose shopping for free as well?
You know, he's a proper bloke, and somebody says, do you want to come and see the Arsenal? He says, yes. No problem with that at all.
Yeah, but why are people inviting him? That's the question. What are they getting in return? That's the question people want to know. Paul Richards, appreciate you joining us. Amazing, we had a whole conversation. I wasn't called far right by a Labour advisor, so that's nice. Very excited about it. Thanks, Benedict. Coming up next, latest headlines, plenty more to come. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Lots to talk about today, as always, whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or any connected device. It is great to have you on board. Great to hear from you on the phones as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get in touch. Lots of different topics I want you to get in touch with me about today. One, of course, that vote later on this afternoon in the House of Commons, where Tory MPs have added an amendment to another bill, basically calling for a national inquiry into the grooming gang and the rape gang. But we know that Labour are going to be whipped to vote against that. They're calling this a political stunt, playing politics. It's bound to come up at pmqs come midday. We'll be taking the highlights of that with Peter Cardwell just at about 12:30 today. You know, he watches, so we don't have to. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that vote. Who is politicking on that? If anyone, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. Also asking your thoughts on the NHS. Talk about that a lot in the last hour. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says he is ashamed as patients face 2-day waits. 50-hour plus, some people at hospital A&Es across the country. This amid a growing winter flu crisis, which, as always, along with the arrival of January every year, complete surprise to everyone working in the NHS and in the government, and the arrival of, as always, January bugs that cause people to go to hospital, also massive shock to the system. These people really need to stop reading horoscopes and start just looking at past evidence. I wonder if there are going to be lots of elderly people who get ill this January. Yes, there are. Why don't you plan for it and don't allow anyone to go on holiday in January? Does that seem unreasonable to you? Like, for instance, you know, you don't let all your staff go off on holiday if you run a restaurant just before Christmas because you've got Christmas parties. It seems to me this abject incompetence. But should the Health Secretary be ashamed? I want to know your reaction. 0344 499 1000. You can text the word TALK and send your message to 87222. You can also get in touch on X at Talk TV. Don't forget the calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. So we'll be talking about all of that. Also going to be talking about British Special Forces being accused of a deliberate policy of executing Afghan civilians who are unarmed, including children. This is an allegation from an officer from a rival unit. We'll talk to a former military man about that. Also, what Donald Trump had to say at that extraordinary press conference at Mar-a-Lago, refusing to rule out using military force to acquire Greenland, retake the Panama Canal, and also calling on all NATO members to spend at least 5% of their GDP on defence rather than the current requirement of 2%, which many of them are not even managing at all. And we'll be talking about Facebook, as the Meta chief, Mark Zuckerberg, has announced that Facebook is going to scrap its, as we know, highly politicised, now he admits it, fact-checking programme after Zuckerberg pledged to restore free expression on the social network. Well, that's nice of him, isn't it? We'll talk about that as well here at the Home of Common Sense. Lots of common sense, I expect, from our guest, Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, joining me today. You're not so sure about that,
I thought you were going to leave with speaking of winter bugs. So actually, that's much nicer. You know, just the virus that you can't quite get rid of.
There is that.
Yeah,
there is that.
You can't change
let's talk first of all about this political stunt that Labour is accused of, accusing Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, and indeed Robert Jenrick and the
17 remaining Tory MPs.
Yes, exactly. I'll name that Tory MP in 8. Basically about this grooming gang inquiry. Is it a political stunt from Kemi Badenoch? I mean, Labour got a fair point there. You lot were in office. You were in the cabinet, Kemi. And you didn't do anything about this and bringing in a new inquiry. So it's a bit rich to call for it now just because Elon Musk has said we should have one.
It really is a sign that Kemi Badenoch is not really a leader. She is a follower. She is following a news agenda. She's even following the person who she beat in the leadership contest, and that Robert Jenrick is the one coming out most strongly about this.
Yeah.
But both of them are downstream of a man in the United States on Twitter, Elon Musk, who is the one that's sort of mainly driving this. And of course that's come. That literally has actually arrived because of a discussion on Twitter that Musk simply became aware of, where the subject of grooming gangs was brought up. That's literally where this has come from, the free expression of a public forum. But as you say, 14 years of Tory government, this was a well-known thing that it was happening, and there was simply not that sort of animus from the Conservatives, from Kevin Badenoch, or to be fair, from Robert Jenrick at the time, to have that sort of inquiry. It's only now downstream.
Were they calling for it behind the scenes and nothing was happening? You know, I have a funny feeling they probably weren't.
I would probably say that when it comes to institutional child rape, it is the sort of thing that morally you should feel you are able to break ranks and say publicly.
I should think so. And look, Kemi Badenoch has been a very brave soul on a lot of these issues, on the woke issues, and speaking out, and often against, we understand, you know, the advice that she was given, you know, and cabinet collective responsibility and the like. So I've been very impressed with her on that front. I think that's why a lot of Tory members wanted to vote for her. Jenrick, I mean, we were discussing a lot on the show yesterday what Robert Jenrick had to say about, you know, we're importing these sort of alien cultures where people have a medieval attitude towards women. I mean, you know, I'm so glad that mainstream politicians are saying this stuff out loud now. I mean, Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, was booed in Parliament. I mean, extraordinary. He was booed when he said, you know, it's not politicking, it's not a stunt to actually, you know, call for, you know, it's not far right, he said, to call for an inquiry.
Yeah, but again, can I be honest about this? Like, how long have they known that people like this are coming to the UK? It is not a surprise.
Most of it happened under
If anybody has been to Pakistan or Algeria or many other parts of the world, you will see, and it's not actually just women, they have pretty backwards attitudes towards lots of things. You know, Jews, for instance. You know,
gay people,
exactly.
non-Muslims.
Yeah,
now,
it's not even just Muslim countries as well. You go to Latin America and you ask, you know, a lot of people, what are your thoughts on homosexuals? It's not exactly positive. And then when they go to the United States...
Has anyone been to Africa or asked people about that?
Well, talk to them about witchcraft in parts of Kenya. They still think it's a thing.
You know Pakistan very well, don't you? You've done a lot of work in Pakistan.
This is one of the things that really slightly irritates me about the whole conversation about grooming gangs is nobody's prepared to talk about it and then suddenly it's just Pakistanis. Pakistan is not just a country where everybody speaks the same language and they're all from the same ethnic group. Actually, there's one group that's massively overrepresented when it comes to these cases of child sex abuse, and that tends to be from people from Kashmir. So, you know, you're tarring people from, I don't know, Lahore.
Is that a particularly poor part?
Well, it's not a particularly great part, you know, in as much as there are particularly great parts in Pakistan. But, you know, you try and, you know, tar a Balochi or a Pashto with the same brush. Yeah. They're not even the same cultures. They don't speak the same languages. Yeah. And I have to say, it's a real reflection of the multicultural brigade. Britain is open and we tolerate all cultures. They wouldn't know that. They don't know the difference between these things. You try and ask them about, you know, details about life in Poland. They don't know these things. There is a complete lack of interest. There is just this sort of assumption that you can open the doors, invite everybody in, and within a couple of hours they'll be just like us because really everybody's a liberal. That's what they're just waiting to be.
Yeah, that's why they've come here. No, that isn't why they've come here. Yeah, that's interesting. And what do you make of Jess Phillips? You know, we've had horrible death threats to her. What Elon Musk wrote about her was absolutely appalling. She's not a rape genocide apologist who should be in jail. Also, anyone who uses the word genocide, unless you are talking about genocide, and no, it's not happening in Gaza either, is an idiot and really needs to stop doing it. That word should be... there are words that need to be used very specifically, like, in my view, far right, genocide, racist. Yeah. If you use those words and just throw them around about anybody, they lose their meaning and their power, and that is a very dangerous thing. Because what do you then do when you're talking about those actual things? Because you've lost those words. But Jess Phillips, of course, done lots of interviews like, oh, this is awful. It is terrible it's happened to her. Everything that Jess Phillips talks about is always about Jess Phillips' feelings. Exactly. So it is always... Now, she'd made the point, look, this is nothing compared to what these girls have gone through, blah, 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 blah. I get that. She's, you know... But she did these incredibly long interviews. You think... I was watching one of them with my husband last night, and he was going, she's been on air for 10 minutes. She hasn't said anything.
Well, I did joke that this was Elon Musk. The worst thing that Elon Musk has actually done is give her an opportunity to talk about herself. And I know that's slightly mean, but at the same time, it's also true. As you say, she did point out that, yes, lots of people have suffered disproportionately. But it's not just Jess Phillips, actually, to be fair. It's people platforming her and asking her questions specifically about how do you feel? How has this affected you? Rather than, what is it you're doing, Minister? What is it that you're actually doing to improve the lives of people?
Why is what Elon Musk says unfair about you?
Yeah,
but that's a particular issue, genuinely. It's a particular issue with women journalists asking women ministers, particularly Labour ministers. Everything is always, and how do you feel about being Chancellor? How do you feel about, walking into number 10? Yeah. How do you feel? It's always, how do you feel?
And here's the breakdown.
Ladies, get a grip.
They are also, whatever their background, they are now all middle class and very successful. And the
Jess Phillips is always middle class. This is the biggest lie. Jess Phillips, she's all blimey. She's absolutely plays this whole
Rugby,
working
Victoria
class.
Derbyshire, I don't know about these people. people, I don't know their backgrounds, but yes, Jess Phillips. But the point is, we're talking now about the feelings of middle-class, highly successful media and Politico women. Once again, we are ignoring and abandoning the working class.
By the way,
girls.
these are all the people who also lost their minds over Me Too, and some director or A-list actor in Hollywood, touching someone's behind, and isn't it wonderful? Everyone's turned up at the Golden Globes wearing black dresses to make a point. I'm sorry, these people are idiots. They really are. Again, people don't care about white working class girls. We know that. How do we know that? Because they haven't done anything to protect white working class girls.
And you read some of the testimony.
That's the giveaway.
You read some of the testimony in the court notes, and you can see the disdain with which they are treated as if they are a lesser category of person. Actually, the way that they were treated by law enforcement, by social workers, and again, it all goes. For me, the Labour movement was set up for the urban working class, for somebody to represent them. And once
middle
again...
classes don't need to be represented.
And
we're
now,
doing fine.
And the party is now that of the multicultural and the established middle class. Once again, the urban working class, no one cares when they are the ones that suffer. They are expendable.
Absolutely. Let's talk about A&E. In crisis, people waiting 2 days, 50 hours plus even in some hospitals. The usual crisis. What a surprise. No one sees it coming. I mean, it's just getting tiring. And now we're told, the West Street says he's ashamed of how some patients are treated in NHS. And now we're told also that Britain needs to be worried about this HMPV virus. No, I hadn't heard of it either. Hadn't heard of rhinovirus before. We were told about that a couple of years ago. But about this one spreading in China. I mean, I literally don't care anymore. I'm genuinely, I'm with Boris Johnson in those WhatsApps. Let the bodies pile high. I don't care anymore. We're going to have to accept that human beings get ill sometimes and some of them die. We're going to have to get to grips with this idea and learn to live with it, I'm afraid.
I mean, sooner or later there will be an actual major pandemic for which there will need to be... they do come around every couple of centuries or so. But the main thing is...
But we'll have one sooner than that, given the madness what they're doing in these...
course. But the main... I mean, we've had 8 almost reach that cusp in the last sort of 25 years. But... The main thing is here, it's sort of irrelevant. If you don't have a health service that is prepared for the fairly basic things that are predictable, what actual hope do you have? Shutting down society wouldn't work for this country, even if we had the Black Death, because we just wouldn't do it very well. That's the thing. It would be incompetent.
Well, people don't know, because everyone, again, like the last lockdown, they expect to be able to sit at home with their laptop, but have other people make food for them and bring it to them, and then be cross about those people being in the street.
Yeah.
I mean, don't.
Pneumonic plague doesn't really work that way. I mean, it would be. It would be. It wouldn't be at all. But still, it's the fact that we can't get the basic things like flu. That, as we say, it comes around like clockwork.
But again, also, as Roy Lilly, our former NHS Trust chairman, guest pointed out, and again, it's something we've discussed so many times. If you compare our healthcare system to with similar-ish amounts of money, we are not off the scale in terms of like spending way less or anything than other European countries. And you look at their, the capacity. They keep their capacity around the 80% mark. Ours is over 90% all of the time. On the best, sunniest day in the summer, when everyone's as healthy as they can be, we are at like 95% capacity. We have no room for a major emergency of any sort whatsoever at any time. We have fewer, by a long way, fewer doctors, fewer nurses, fewer beds, fewer MRI scanners and everything for our population. And that is partly because we have this monolithic system. I don't think really anyone's going to be able to turn it. You can vaguely improve it. When they're talking about, our best bet is we're going to have, most people getting treated within 18 weeks. I mean, 4 months. Your GP says, yes, you may have cancer and you may well get treated or see a consultant at least within 4 months. And we're going to go, well done. First world country. Well done. This should be a source of national shame.
It's no wonder that nobody can see the crisis coming if you have to wait sort of 6 months for a glaucoma appointment. I mean, it's supposed to be a first world system.
It's not.
And it's not. And it's far behind.
And it never will be.
No, and it won't. And if nothing else, even with all the money and the best will, it won't be because of the demographic changes in this country. The older the population gets, the more strain there is on the system. You can't keep it going.
Yeah, you old people. My parents, if you're watching or listening right now, you just sort it out.
Can you just emigrate somewhere?
Come on, yeah.
Give us net zero immigration by just leaving somewhere that has better health.
I do not mean that. Do we mean? I don't know.
I do.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of in Blade Runner territory, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're just like,
I have a very dystopian view of what's coming.
So I hate to tell you, but I'd be long gone.
Absolutely.
I could definitely feel at 56 I'm getting to the age where it's like I'm getting everything.
Absolutely everything.
But I think that is though, because I have a teenage daughter, so a lot of parties and pub going. and 2 3-year-old nephews.
Yes.
And I mean, genuinely, and this lot at work, they're just disease vectors.
Yes. The huddled masses.
The huddled
disgusting lesser
this
people.
lot, you lot, yeah, I'm talking about you. I'm the one who made them all ill in December. Everyone was ill over Christmas. I've come back with the same thing. Everyone's loving me at the moment. Really not. Let's talk about Donald Trump. I have to say, I was watching his press conference last night at Mar-a-Lago, and I just thought, I know this is terrible because so many things he said were just awful. And, you know, whenever I've said, I think, you know, if I were voting in the American election this time, well, in 2016 and 2020, I'd have gone for the Democrat candidate, with holding my nose. Because, but this time round, I think Kamala Harris was so beyond awful. I thought Donald Trump, and also I think what the Democrats have done in the last few years is so beyond awful. They're insane on most really, really crucial things I care about. I think Donald Trump was the better bet. I never said I think he'll be a great president. I mean, I think he's a great man. Some of the things he said were really quite terrifying, let's be honest. But I have to say, I did think, yeah, it's going to be a fun 4-year ride, though, isn't it? Because we're stuck with Keir Starmer here. That's it. Always people thinking he's going to be out of office, and there's no mechanism for that. We've got him for 4 years min, 4.5 probably more. It's going to be grim. He is so much more useless and awful and po-faced and just badly judging everything than we possibly thought he could be. We thought he'd be bad. He is so much worse and boring with it, which is an extraordinary combination. At least Donald Trump is going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why should we also be surprised that he might take this attitude, given that so much of the rest of the world has tacitly expressed acceptance of great powers deciding to encroach on other people's territory because it's in their national interest? As much as the West tried to put sanctions on Russia, the rest of the world just went, nah, that's fine. And most of the rest of the country will do the same should China try to annex Taiwan. So the United States is going, well, we're top dog anyway.
Well, this is it. I mean, let's play a little clip of what he had to say about Greenland and Panama, because this was extraordinary. And a reporter asked him about, you know, taking control of, you know, by the way, other countries. Let's hear what the reporter had to ask him and what Donald Trump had to say.
Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China.
You have to say China. Everyone has to now say China, not China. It is extraordinary. I mean, this is exactly the sort of Putin playbook, which is, well, this is, you know, Russian sphere of influence. Russia needs a buffer zone. Russia needs to have control. I think we'll invade Ukraine. I mean, this is absolutely true. He also, by the way, warned of, I quite like his words, you know, hell to pay. Hell will break out if the hostages in Gaza are not returned by Hamas. Yeah, do you know what? All for that. But he also talked about NATO members should have to pay 5% of their GDP, not the current 2%. Your reaction to all of that, Benedict?
The NATO thing is correct. NATO members should be spending more money, but there is an ulterior motive there. That's that a lot of that money will end up going into the pockets of US arms companies because they are the major suppliers to a lot of NATO countries. And European ones can't compete with their American counterparts. The rest of the world, as I say, has sort of taken its lead from Ukraine and what China is currently doing, not just with regards to Taiwan, but the rest of the South China Sea. And now I see the United States, this is my interpretation, is doing much the same because it goes, well, the rest of the world will actually just accept when a great power does this. They may not like it, but what are they going to do? They can't actually stop it from happening.
Well, exactly. What is Denmark and any of Denmark's allies, presumably including us, going to do if he sees his green?
And I think it's really worth noting that both China and Russia, actually, they're betting big on exploration of the Arctic Circle for natural resources, rare earth minerals, all that sort of thing. Greenland has all of those. It hasn't been properly tapped yet. Uranium is another big one. There are huge natural resources there to be taken, and I can understand why the US would consider this to be in its interest. You're also going to see this in Antarctica, but also when it comes to the Panama Canal, he's actually right. This is a national security issue for the United States, and as China sort of gets more interested in the affairs of the rest of the world, it is taking a great interest in the affairs of Latin America, and it's doing that as a ballast against what the US is doing in terms of trying to control the flow of trade in and out of the South China.
This is all about control of the seas.
Yeah.
This is all about control of minerals, of basic resources. This is about economic might, which boosts. You can't have military might without economic might, but you can't have economic might, particularly if you're America. I mean, control of the Pacific and control of the Atlantic, and particularly that route between the Atlantic and the Pacific through the Panama Canal.
But there is a lesson here for Britain, which is that Britain remains somehow still really well positioned on the global stage with some of the territories that we still have to have a great deal of control over a lot of this. Be it Diego Garcia, be it the Falkland Islands, be it St Helena or Ascension, we still have access to so many parts of the world where there are these resources.
Are we still a player?
We could be if we wanted to be, but we have a government that seems dead set on giving these things away. And I will say this now. The Falkland Islands may seem a very long time, but it's 45 years ago. That will come into play for as long as the exploration of Antarctica continues. The Antarctic exploration trade treaty is up in, I think, 20 years' time, at which point all the major powers will go, drill, baby, drill. That will become prime real estate because you need somewhere for tankers to stop off en route to the Northern Hemisphere. If people don't think that will be a target for Argentina, backed maybe by China, they're living in cloud cuckoo land.
I tell you what, the next few years are going to be very lively, are they not? And again, this is why I think we need to be spending, as Donald Trump says, more on our defence spending, wherever we're getting the arms from, as long as they work. I'm not that bothered. By the way, some breaking news just while you were speaking, it's just been handed in to me. There's an interview, we mentioned Jess Phillips earlier on the grooming gangs and the rape gang scandal, and it was all about Jess in the interview they played out. She did with Sky last night. She also did one with the BBC. But in a podcast which she's recorded, which they just released today, she just says nothing is off the table when dealing with the grooming gangs, including whether or not there could be an independent inquiry. She says a new victims panel is being set up by the government to hear about abuse by grooming gangs, and so nothing's off the table, including a new national inquiry if victims want one. But we know victims want one.
Yeah, I think that is simply trying to throw a little bit of bread into the water to try and calm people, saying, don't worry, we're not completely...
in the vote today.
Yeah, this is so that they're going to be able to say to people who have a moral quandary about this, we might, we're not ruling it out forever, but realistically...
We just don't want to do it on the vote today.
Yeah, but realistically, they should already be pushing ahead with these things. And also, I'm sorry, a victims panel. They'll listen to it, then they'll ignore it.
We've already heard from the victims.
Yeah, they've already ignored them once. What's this going to do? It's not going to change anything.
Again, I don't think victims want to get to talking. We know what happened to them. There have been court cases. Now let's do something about it and stop the next girls being victims as well. 11:25 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on all of the stories we've got. Do you know what things we haven't got to today? The cost of Britain's borrowing hitting a 27-year high. Basically, I would have more spending cuts, or we're going to have more tax hikes to balance the books. But it's higher, the cost of borrowing, whether it's 10-year or 30-year girls, it's higher than it was after the Liz Truss mini-budget, which apparently broke the economy. Funny that, eh? It's almost like the world markets don't have much faith in the Truss prodigy and former economist, possibly, who knows when, Rachel Reeves and her ability to run our economy. Funny that, isn't it? Anyway, do get in touch. Love to hear your thoughts on all of our big topics. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Get your calls up next. This is Talk.
Saturday night, and you lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley-Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
I know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's got nipples.
I didn't think you had nipples. I assumed you just came in an egg.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. 11:29 is the time. Lots more top guests coming, including Benedict Spence. I'm adding you in as under top guest. Going to be talking about Donald Trump on defence and these allegations against the SAS with Andrew Fox soon. Also, the fact checkers, who aren't fact checkers, they're just political censors, the likes of Facebook and Instagram. Well, that's going to end, we're told. Yeah, for how long? By Mark Zuckerberg. We'll talk to Spiked Online's Fraser Myers about that. Right now, though, let's go straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call on all the topics we're talking about today, but particularly about the NHS. The Health Secretary saying he's ashamed that patients are having to wait even 2 days or more at hospital A&Es. As what a surprise, we've got a winter flu crisis. I know, I'm as surprised as apparently the people who run our sodding health service are every year. Let's go to Ray. He's in Bedford. Hello, Ray. What do you want to say?
Hi, Julie.
Hello.
Happy New Year to you.
Lovely to speak to you. What do you want to say?
Yeah, just to say about our health minister. I mean, he says about he's devastated. I wonder if he remembers just the interview he done a little while ago, like a day ago, saying, what would you do, Minister, and tell the older people who can't turn their heating? What would you say to them? Turn the heat up.
Yeah.
What a wonderful thing to say from the health minister. Perhaps he'll just turn his sleeves up and just look at Starmer and say, are we both doing the right things? I mean, I'm devastated at these people. They don't give a damn, Julie.
I mean, this is the thing. Look, he wouldn't have made that. You know, he's part of a cabinet that made the decision, but he wouldn't have made the decision on winter fuel. Look, the thing is, the winter fuel, one of the reasons why people need to go to hospital, particularly elderly people in winter, is because they get too cold, their bodies can't cope with it. And we know that there will be elderly people on low incomes who aren't entitled to the winter fuel allowance anymore, who will be scrimping and saving, don't have family members who can help them out or have any family at all, and being too cold to keep themselves healthy, and will end up in A&E and glibly saying put the heating up. Well, I mean, God, you know, even I, you know, I'm a good earner, and even I bulk up my heating bill.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say that about somebody who's really on the breadline. You wouldn't talk like that as a health minister. It just sort of says, I'll go off track and say what I want, you know, attitude.
But we're often told, oh, wrap up warm. Oh, really? You think someone who's got to the age of 90 and hasn't worked that out?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's terrible, really, isn't it? I mean, you feel so sad when they talk about things like that, you know.
I mean, no one in a first world country should worry about that. No one.
They're never held to account, Julie, though, are they?
Well, no, but the thing is, we only care about certain deaths. You've got to remember, in this country, we care about heatwave deaths because that's climate change. We care about deaths from COVID. But if someone dies of something else, that doesn't really count anymore.
No, it's sad, really. Sad, you know.
Yeah, you make a very fair point, Ray. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's go to Jane, who is in Wales. Hello, Jane.
Hi.
Hello, what do you want to say?
My question is, when we had the COVID epidemic, we set up all these hubs.
Oh, yeah?
Instantly, that were equipped.
The Nightingale hospitals and all the extra,
Yeah. Instead of leaving the ambulance service tied up, why aren't we getting that equipment back and setting that up and getting it sorted that way?
Yeah, well, because it only matters if people have got COVID. I mean, did you not get the memo, Jane? Apparently in 2020, this is the first time we learned that people died of anything.
But we have I mean, he says he's ashamed, and he's disgusted. Well, if he's that ashamed and that disgusted, then get off your backside and do something about it.
I mean, there's a cost to it. But again, it does seem utterly bizarre. I mean, one of our callers pointed out earlier, we used to have these cottage hospitals where, you know, elderly people who didn't need medical care but weren't fit enough to go home without any sort of someone looking after them, that, you know, that they were in these cottage hospitals. So, you know, you didn't have all these, you know, incredibly expensive, there's hundreds of pounds to keep someone in a hospital bed, but they didn't need to be in a hospital bed, so you could do it cheaper.
Exactly. We've got a cottage hospital here.
You do?
And it doesn't do anything, you know, like that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't take in the elderly because they're considered that they need more attention.
That's interesting, yeah. But the key thing is, you can always deal with these things. Where there's a political will, there is a way, and they do cost money, but lots of money is spent on lots of different things if they are a priority, aren't they? But we're just going to go every year, oh, look at all these people dying or getting very, very sick and needing hospital treatment from, you know, from all these other viruses, and then we're going to go, oh, well, and move on.
And not being able to keep warm.
Yeah. As Ray made the point, yeah, exactly. It is extraordinary, isn't it? A bit of joined-up thinking would be a good idea, wouldn't it?
One leads to the other. You know, what do you expect? If you take away the winter fuel and take away their pensions and tax them on this, tax them on that, well, they worked all their lives. Don't you think they need some care in their old age?
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the view that the pension should be high enough that nobody should have to worry about putting heating on. These things should be basic. Here's an idea, though. We could have cheaper energy bills if we didn't have a load of policies that cost billions. Or let's all have wind power and then have a backup for gas and pay for energy twice. I mean, all of these Labour policies, and indeed Tory policies before then, they all tie in for each other. They're not in isolation. They all feed on each other. There's no reason why our energy bills should be so high that people are worried about putting the sodding central heating on.
Well, exactly. I mean, you know, like, I have an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
I had flu over Christmas.
Yeah.
I had my flu jab. I still had really, really bad flu. But, you know, my heating was up. I was snuggled in bed. I was, you know, I got my thermos flask and I had my lemon and whatever, you know.
Do you know what? I think I'll come and join you. That's how I feel still. Well, I'm glad you're getting better, at least. As you say, you know, keeping warm is absolutely vital for, you know, it's why when you go into hospitals, it's absolutely horrific because it's so warm, but it's not for very frail people lying in bed all day. Jane, thank you so much. I hope you do feel better, my darling. I hope we're keeping you company, at least, while you're unwell. It's Jane in Wales. 11:35 is the time. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be talking to Andrew Fox about what Donald Trump's had to say about defence and indeed about Canada. I didn't even get to Canada earlier. The Panama Canal and indeed Greenland. And we'll also talk about the SAS being accused of war crimes. That's up next. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Benedict Spencer with me, and I know we'll get your thoughts in just a few moments, but let's talk about, well, all things defence and global with Andrew Fawkes, defence expert, research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. A very good morning to you, Andrew. Happy New Year.
Hi, Julia. Same to you.
So much to talk about. Can we start with Donald Trump? First of all, on NATO members should raise their defence spending to 5% of GDP rather than the current 2% of GDP, which, frankly, many countries are not even managing. Is he right?
I think we're seeing a lot of positioning from Mr. Trump at the moment. You know, he's a man who loves a deal. Everything in international relations for him is transactional. And I think he's setting out his negotiating position for when he comes into the office. 5% doesn't feel particularly realistic at this point. I mean, it would be great. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd hugely support 5%. But
we'll spend a lot more than that of our GDP if and when we have to go to war, won't we?
Exactly that. But, you know, a lot of NATO members are struggling to make even the 2% they're committed to. So, and that was after a previous Trump administration where he made similar levels of threat to them. So, you know, 5%, great. There's also an element, as with the Canada and Greenland stuff, of him playing to his base as well. You know, there's a real perception amongst Trump voters that NATO members aren't pulling their weight and they're reliant on the US. And
well, they aren't. I mean, they aren't. We can't defend Ukraine. I mean, Britain can't even defend itself, realistically, given our current military numbers and our procurement. And we are reliant on America. We shouldn't be. I don't see why American taxpayers should have to fund us.
Well, there's a point that America has benefited enormously from having so many countries within its sphere of influence, and that's been a huge economic boon to them to have so many countries reliant on them. So there's two sides to this. It's not.
And
all,
as Benedict pointed out earlier, lots of military spend that we do would actually be with American defence companies, so they make a lot of money out there. But still, I think, you know, there's a truth to it. He was right about the 2%. When he's haranguing Germany on this, and everyone, the great, the good, laughed at him the first term on this one. I remember saying at the time, you know, he's right about this one. But he's also, and he's talked about, I mean, these threats to the Panama Canal, to retake, that was built by the Americans, of course. It was handed over by Jimmy Carter. Seizing Greenland, not ruling out military force. Also talking about Canada, you know, incredibly close ally of the United States, very disparagingly. He did it when he was actually, you know, with, God bless his soul. He's out soon. Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, talking about Canada as the 51st state rather than a country in its own right. What do you make of these threats? This idea that, we'll just take anything we want or need and to hell with everyone else?
Well, again, I think it's red meat for his base. You know, his ultimate, the policies he's actually released are all very boring and economic and benefit not huge numbers of people in terms of direct handouts or anything like that. And so this is just saber rattling to keep the MAGA base on side and tell people what they want to hear. You know,
but we don't like it when Vladimir Putin does it. It's the same playbook as Vladimir Putin's justification for invading Ukraine. It's no different at all.
Yeah, but the difference is, of course, that America is not going to invade Greenland and it's not going to invade Canada or take back the Panama Canal by force. This stuff, it's pie in the sky thinking. The key point here is that he is setting out his position prior to negotiating with these people. And so there's saber rattling, there's overstating what he's going to try and achieve in order that when he comes to the negotiating table, he's got a much stronger position in this transactional environment he likes to create.
We shouldn't be so worried, although I did quite like the whole Gulf of Mexico becoming the Gulf of America. That did just make me laugh. I mean, you know, he could. I mean, basically, America rules the seas around the entire world. If they want to change the name of the seas, they can change the names of the seas, right?
And they're going to change Canada to Eastern Alaska by the sound of things as well.
Yeah, by the sounds of it. Let's talk about things closer to home, though. Extraordinary revelation: an officer from a rival unit, Special Forces, has been accused Special Forces of a deliberate policy of executing sometimes unarmed Afghan civilians, including children. In evidence given to a public inquiry into suspected war crimes in Afghanistan, the soldier said an allegedly rogue Special Forces unit had targeted all males of fighting age, including under 16s, even if they posed no threat to troops. Now, this whistleblower is known only by the name N1799. He told the Inquirer he believed that a unit called UKSF-1, so UK Special Forces 1, had carried out an illegal policy of targeting everybody on operations. And he said he'd been told by a whistleblower that this group had committed multiple instances of murder, and this is all part of this inquiry into extrajudicial killings by British forces between 2010 and 2013 in Afghanistan. How credible are these allegations?
Well, certainly from a source of that nature, if it's an officer in another special forces unit, you know, that is a very credible allegation, and it's deeply serious. And I think we're taking it seriously correctly. And should this be found to be correct, then there should be a significant punishment, because when you're serving in these elite units that do very special roles, you're given a huge amount of trust. And when you violate that trust, then the sanctions need to be appropriate. So I think we're doing the right thing in investigating. SF officers have to go through huge amounts of selection to get where they are. You know, they're usually of the highest caliber. So if they're saying these things seriously under oath, then we should be paying due attention and taking it seriously.
And there's a big difference, isn't there, between, I mean, again, we've seen cases, you know, with like armed police officers and the Met Police being murder trials, you know, for shooting people. And I think a lot of us, and a lot of audience would have a lot of sympathy for, you know, it's all very well being an armchair general and saying, oh, well, you know, with all the information we have now, that person wasn't a threat. Whereas actually at that moment, you know, everybody is a threat. You're Iraq, Afghanistan, you're in the wartime situation. You've seen your buddies, your comrades in arms blown up a few minutes earlier by IED, and anyone appears, you know, you shoot first and ask questions later. I've got a lot of sympathy for our soldiers out there. But this is very different. This is talking about people who've already been captured, civilians. They know that they are unarmed, executing them. This is what an officer in this unit told the officer who's giving evidence. That is a very different thing, isn't it? And the view of military men like you, military women like yourself, who've been on the front line is, you know, that is way beyond, you know, the chaos of war.
Yeah, we don't do that. The Army has British, you know, the British Army's values and standards, which every soldier will know. It's drilled into them from basic training. And they came about as a result of atrocities in Iraq, Baha Musa, and Camp Breadbasket. And so we've developed a system where soldiers know what right and wrong is. We all know what the rules of engagement are when we go on the ground, so you know when you can and cannot pull your trigger.
Yeah.
And in an elite unit, they've got no excuse for not knowing that.
They're
They'll know
so highly trained.
Yeah, exactly that. And we talk about the psychological factors that come into this, like hostile environments and normalised violence and an enhanced emotional state can all contribute. But what that needs to offset it is really good leadership. And if this has been happening endemically, and officers have been reporting it and nothing's been done, then that's a double failure, not only of the soldiers who committed any crimes, but also the officers and commanders who failed to get a grip of it at the time.
And the allegation here is not that it was, you know, a rogue officer or a rogue soldier or a rogue unit, but that actually it was a deliberate, you know, policy. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what comes of this. Andrew Fox, really appreciate you talking to us about all that. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. He's a former major in the parachute regiment as well. Benedict Spence, let me come back specifically on the SAS allegations first.
It's very difficult because there's an awful lot of activity that goes on with British Special Forces without, you know, beyond the realms of what people will ever know about, basically, operating in places that they're not supposed to. I
absolutely hope so, Benedict.
They really do. And I don't want to say that there is a separate set of rules, because that kind of gives the impression that they operate with impunity. But there is that sort of tacit understanding that special forces often do bend, if not break, rules in the pursuit of higher goals, which nobody's supposed to be knowing about. Now, this is a very separate sort of allegation, because this is, you know, during what was going on in Afghanistan. This wasn't some sort of clandestine mission in a country we weren't supposed to be in. But there is, I think, a sort of a degree to which very often special forces, and this is not saying that they break rules necessarily, but they go to the nth degree, and sometimes that can lead into other things, which is basically, I don't want to say cover-ups necessarily, but behaviour that would not be considered acceptable.
But that's the interesting thing is how often actually it's military people who won't defend this because they've been in those situations, and part of the training is to cope with that. But just finally, can we come back on Trump though, just before we go to a break? Andrew Fox was very relaxed about Trump, saying, you know, this is just Trump talking, it's a negotiating position, but it's still irresponsible way to talk about, you know, allies like Canada, you know, Western democratic allies like Greenland.
Well, I mean, Justin Trudeau, I know he is leaving, but he has referred to Canada as a post-national country. country, so he can't be particularly upset.
Doesn't believe in borders.
If his borders are then violated by another country, he can't complain. He said it out right there.
Well, I have to say, we did enjoy talking about Justin Trudeau yesterday.
The end of the career of Canada's first black Prime Minister, as Tom Slater said very, very amusingly. Look, I think that this is probably right, that there is a lot of saber rattling here. The United States is not going to invade Greenland. That's because it doesn't need to invade Greenland. It can simply lean on the authorities of these countries. It's not, and this is one of the things I would say is different. The difference between the United States and, say, Russia. The United States doesn't necessarily need to go in all guns blazing to get what it wants. But China is also getting to that stage now where it has that much sort of soft power, if you like, that it doesn't necessarily need to invade a country to get complete control.
That's kind of why America will say, but I still think the language, I think, is absolutely, I mean, but that's it.
Trumpian.
It's Trumpian. It's going to be a lively 4 years, and as I say, we're stuck with Keir Starmer, so we need someone to liven things up. 11:48 is the time. Up next, going to talk about well, maybe it will still be a lively debate online, because the goodness of his soul, Mark Zuckerberg, head of Meta, is going to get rid of those so-called fact checkers on Facebook and Instagram, the people who are censoring people for political reasons. Apparently they were politicised. I know, Mark, we told you that years ago. We'll talk about that up next with Fraser Myers from Spiked. This is Talk.
We've spoken before, Mike. I have said that I want to see at least one senior police officer, a chief constable, and I've got a few in my mind who I would like to see charged with gross criminal neglect, criminal charges, misconduct in malfeasance in a public office. They knew what was going on. They closed down these cases. They abandoned the children, and they are criminally liable, in my opinion.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:52 is the time. Benedict Spence still with me. Now we're joined by Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked Online. Very good morning to you, Fraser.
Good to see you, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Well, look, I wanted to talk to you about something. It's a big issue on Spike, big issue I've talked about, and often with you, indeed, on your podcast many times, about the incredible censorship that we've seen online over the years. Now, I think a lot of us are very delighted with Elon Musk, a flawed character, I think we'll agree, in recent weeks, but taking over X and actually ending, people being basically thrown off Twitter simply for saying things like, men can't become women, women can't become men, and basic facts like that. But we've seen horrendous amount of people thrown off Facebook and Instagram and censored by Meta's Mark Zuckerberg in the line of fact-checking. And they've had a whole team of people who've been fact-checking all these years, highly politicised, censorious fact-checking from their very woke agenda and Democrat agenda as well. Suddenly, what a surprise, we're about to have Donald Trump back in office. Turns out he doesn't think these fact-checkers are any use anymore, and they've been too political. Are you surprised by this turn of events?
I wouldn't say I'm surprised. It's actually not Mark Zuckerberg's first mea culpa. He admitted when he was on Joe Rogan's podcast a few years ago that the FBI had essentially pre-warned him about the Hunter Biden laptop scandal that was about to emerge, which they then censored as disinformation, even though it was true. He also wrote a letter last year to various congressmen saying that, essentially blaming the Biden administration for a lot of the censorship during COVID. I mean, I think that's a bit weak. As Elon Musk has shown, you can simply rip off the censorship. You can defy the US
and
government,
Elon Musk exposed that when he bought Twitter and turned it to X. He did actually expose all of the extraordinary emails that had gone on in between staff there and the White House, basically demanding censorship, which Twitter basically went, okay to.
Exactly, and they could have stood up for themselves, and Mark Zuckerberg could have stood up for himself and his platform back then if he really believed in free speech. I think he sees that the tide is turning on this issue, certainly. There are also some other moves behind the scenes. So, for instance, he's appointed Dana White, the head of UFC fighting, to the Facebook board,
and
a friend and ally of Trump. So there is, there is a bit of grovelling to the new administration going on, but overall, this is really, really good news. Yeah.
But it shouldn't, I mean, again, it shouldn't be happening because of who the president is. I mean, again, I would just expect there to be censorship in the opposite direction. What we want is these companies not to decide when they effectively are the marketplace of our, of our free speech, to decide what we can and can't say. I mean, look, we were massively censored during COVID period by, likes of Google on YouTube. They took our page down here at Talk for apparently three offences. 3 strikes and you're out. And it's only because of the might of this organisation behind us that we were able to get it back up again. We were accused of COVID disinformation when what we said, we'd interviews with top medics and scientists putting stuff which has been now proven to be true. And that was the thing. This whole is the fact-checking that's the problem. Who's fact-checking the fact-checkers, this issue? Because it's not just, it was Twitter was doing it. Now X has got this idea, this community notes, which I don't think everyone's allowed to do. I think people who've paid for their blue ticks are allowed to do, but no one else. But it's actually proven when someone makes a ridiculous statement, you leave it up there, you don't ban it, you don't take that, but you have a note on it saying, this isn't true, and here's the proof of why it's not true, which I think is a much better way to debate. But we've still got the likes of BBC Verify. They're still going, and again, highly politicised. Whenever they've got in touch with me, I'm like, why don't you investigate this, and this? And, they're very, very political in their choice of things they investigate, and they're very political in their verdicts as well.
That's absolutely true. And if you want proof that this is entirely political, you can do what's called a Google Ngram search, and it shows you how often certain words are used. And if you search for mis and disinformation, you'll see that the 2 words explode after 2016, when Britons voted for Brexit and Americans voted for Trump. Suddenly, that was seen as the excuse, as the reason. People have been brainwashed by lies. That's why they're voting the wrong way. And as you said, you've seen it in many of the verdicts as well. I mean, you mentioned BBC Verify, Mariana Spring. I wonder who's going to check some of her facts. She's made some absolutely outlandish claims. Recently, she claimed that 1 in 4 Britons believes that COVID is a hoax, not thinks lockdown is bad or is skeptical of vaccines, literally thinks the whole thing is fake. She says that 1 in 7 Britons has attended an anti-COVID demonstration. That's millions of people. So
We've been at quite a lot of those. I'm pretty sure not. But look, they needed to fact check her CV, for goodness sake. The idea that anybody could be running that unit with A, on her little experience, and B, on her fake CV that she used to get her job originally, I just find untenable. No one else would actually be in that job in that place. But there are so many organisations set up as sort of independent fact checkers, whether it's by Facebook or whether it's by the BBC or other ones. I mean, there was a guy who used to work here who was a massive big, in social media. He was involved in in the climate, anti-climate demonstrations. I mean, the full-on, proper demos. And he works as a fact checker. I mean, I'm not sure these people are politically neutral when they fact. I'm quite happy to have people going, look, this is the fact on this, this is the fact on that. But we know when it comes to climate change, when it comes to COVID, when it comes to things like Brexit, when it comes to Donald Trump, there doesn't seem to be anybody who is neutral enough that you can trust what they have to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there are some, one organisation which I think is quite good is Full Fact, and you can go on their website and you can see they're working out. I think that's the key thing. If you can see someone's working out, if you can see where they've put the two claims aside, side by side, and then you can understand the process they've come to reach the truth. But also, I mean, it's just this very idea that we can have these fact checkers there to pronounce the truth, like as if it's their sort of tablets handed down from God.
Well, remember the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said, you don't listen to anything unless the government says it. You don't know it's true. Wow. I mean, George Orwell didn't go that far, for goodness sake. Fraser Myers, thank you very much. I mean, you guys have been fantastic at Spiked on Lane and trying to tackle a load of these issues on freedom of speech. But I just don't think we need the fact checkers, Benedict.
No, we don't need the fact checkers. This is a new direction of travel, and it's acceptable now to do it now that Trump is in power. Yeah. And actually, it's not just Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos as well, with his tacit endorsement by basically saying, look, the Washington Post editorial board isn't fit for purpose. Yeah. They can see the direction of travel. I think that the wokeism sort of moment is
but again, am I worried it goes too far the direction? I just don't want anyone sitting there as the arbiter of truth. Let us make our own minds up. This is Talk. This is the Home of Common Sense. More coming up soon.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Welcome back if you've been with us for the last couple of hours. Whether you are listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, or watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's great to have your company. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about Labour MPs being whipped to vote against this new national inquiry into grooming gangs being called for by the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch. She's forcing a vote on this, an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Also, we're going to talk more about the Tories saying that migrants from cultures with medieval attitudes to women, this is what, of course, Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, had to say yesterday, should be blocked from coming to Britain. That's what some Tories have been saying, the ongoing row over child grooming gangs. Plus, the state of emergency has been declared by the governor of California as wildfires have swept through the suburbs of Los Angeles. For some reason, wildfires in California is leading the news on pretty much every major news outlet in this country, because 30,000 people might include some celebs who will be bleating about it on social media, even though, of course, despite the claims you will hear, this is not due to climate change. Also, we're going to be talking about PMQs. Yes, the first PMQs of the year has just kicked off. Usual rules apply, though. Peter Caldwell watches it, so we don't have to. And he's going to bring us the highlights in about half an hour's time. This, as I say, is Talk. Welcome to the home of common sense. Welcome also to Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, who is still joining us. He can't escape from the studio. Very good morning to you.
No, nobody's given me the access code. It's really unfortunate.
We lock him in. We lock him in. Yeah, exactly. Them's the rules.
I'm being bullied. Can somebody, like, help me?
Yeah. I do bully him off air quite a lot, mainly because he's always late.
Yeah, well.
Just saying. We should have a poll. Do we ban you because you're always late? Or he comes literally running into the studio.
I do.
At the last minute. Or... Do we want to keep him?
I do it mainly
because we do like
you.
what he has to say.
It's because you told me from the start, being on time, being punctual is my major bugbear. So I thought, okay, this is how I can claw back some power.
You're going to make a great husband. That's how you manage a marriage. Am I right? Anyway, I'm here all week. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for being here. As always, lots to talk about. Just to remind you of our question today specifically, I mean, there's lots of things people are calling in about and getting in touch about, but the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says he is ashamed as patients face 2-day waits at hospital A&Es across the country amid the growing winter flu crisis, which again, winter, January, bugs, all a complete surprise to the NHS and indeed whoever is in charge of running the NHS every single year. But what's your reaction? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1. Standard network rate message. But also a lot of you getting in touch on grooming gangs as well, and that vote that's going to be happening later today in Parliament, where the Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, has basically added an amendment to a bill already going through Parliament, which is on its second reading, basically calling for that national statutory inquiry into the grooming gangs. Well, let's talk about that and all the other big stories today with Craig, now Lord McKinley, a Conservative peer, who joins us. A very good afternoon to you and a Happy New Year.
And to you, Julia, good to be back.
Great to be joined by you. Well, let's talk about this vote today. Who's playing politics? Who is the one doing the political stunts when it comes to Tory leader Kemi Badenoch pushing for this vote, tagging on this amendment to another bill? It's the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. It's got a lot of very worthwhile measures in it, which could fall because of this weird parliamentary system where something is voted down in an amendment form at this stage, then it votes down the whole bill. I'm not quite sure how that works. Or is it the Labour Party by saying they don't want to have this bill, so they don't want to have this inquiry? And then Jess Phillips, the Home Office Safeguarding Minister, in an interview that's been broadcast today, saying nothing's off the table, including national inquiry. Who's playing politics here?
Well, obviously this is an education bill before us today. And I have to say, you spoke in quite glowing terms about it's got good stuff in it. Well, I would actually say it's got a lot of bad stuff in it. It's actually going to unwind a lot of the very, very positive changes that we've made to education over our 14 years in government, the creation of academies, trying to get local education authorities out of the system.
Oh, but in some of the safeguarding issues involved in it are good, though.
Well, yeah, I think obliquely. Now, OK, if there's safeguarding in it, then they should be adopting this ultimate safeguard of permitting a national inquiry. I've got a feeling that Labour will eventually allow this inquiry, and I think they'd be well served to accept it today, because the public are now on side with an inquiry without any doubt at all. I mean, I have to say, from my point of view, there is a stink in the air about this whole issue of grooming gangs. What were the authorities doing? What were they not doing? Was there some sort of blanket put over the whole issue of this being predominantly around men of Pakistani heritage? What was really happening up there? There was enough of a stink in the air that I think the public need to know what actually happened. Now, if I'm thinking that, I don't think I'm off of tune of what the public are thinking either. Now, what I have to say, Julia, is we often find that we reach for an inquiry. Now, look at the other inquiries that we've had over the years. The Iraq inquiry, I remember it finally reported in about 2017, I think. I remember dutifully going to collect this sort of, well, it was almost a mountain of paperwork. And quite frankly, everybody had almost forgotten about the Iraq war. We've got a COVID inquiry that's in progress at the moment. I'm quite sure by the time it reports, you won't even remember how to spell COVID, let alone anything else. So it's often used, dare I say, as a way out by the vagabond. Kick it into the long grass, let's have an inquiry.
And that wasn't actually my first thought about why we don't need another inquiry. We know what happened. Let's deal with the people who allowed it to happen.
Well, this is my point, Julia. What I would rather be seeing right now is perhaps a transposed police force from another part of the country going into those areas, a proper sort of task force being set up so that those who were potential victims of the past can actually come forward, have their say, and we can start arresting and putting into prison whoever was involved in these most foul, honestly most foul of crimes that you and I could ever read about.
That's the thing.
That's what I'd rather see
happen. I want action, but again, we need people to be able to come forward. It's got to be a safe place to come forward. We need to know that the people who are in charge of that are people who are trustworthy.
That could be put in place without an inquiry.
But the extraordinary thing is, again, virtually all of these girls, they did go to the authorities. They told the people in the care homes. They told their teachers. They told the doctor when they went into A&E for when they were pregnant again by their 50-year-old quote boyfriend. They told everything, and no one in a position of authority did anything about it. Indeed, often the girls themselves were arrested.
Well, that's what I think the inquiry could focus on into the future, but I want to focus on what can be done for proper justice right now. Because if those men and perhaps those in authority that were perhaps covering up, turning a blind eye, thinking about multiculturalism and lovely society harmony and all of those good things, doubtless those men are still out there. And doubtless a lot of those people in authority who should be acting as corporate parents to vulnerable young girls, many of which were in care, they are probably in post as well. So that's a here and now need to make sure that this is not happening again. And I've just offered you a proposal of a proper task force, transposed police officers going in, because it may be in some cases that the police locally have some questions.
I think it's very much so. Absolutely.
But I'm guessing. I'm not coming to conclusions. I have enough of a thought that there's stink in the air, that something needs to be done. And
how much of it is political then? Because when people say the Tories are playing, political stunts with this, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, there's a reason why Labour didn't want to have a full inquiry, where they don't want to now. And ministers like Jess Phillips, who I think has been very unfairly slurred by Elon Musk, which is not a rape genocide apologist, it's absurdity, but that actually people like her and many other Labour MPs, including many people in the cabinet, are very worried about losing the Muslim vote. They were worried about losing the Muslim vote. It's 80% a Labour vote, and comes often as as a sort of package vote in many local constituencies, delivered by the local imam. I've spoken to people in these areas who said this is how it works, and basically they're worried about offending people and losing those votes. We saw people turning away from Labour over Gaza. I think they lost 5 seats as a result of that. And that actually this is about politics. This is about not upsetting people who are, they believe, crucial in some key constituencies.
Yes, well, this is the shame, I think, about the way politics is going. We have a divided society rather than a united one, which we have evolved into, I thought, in this country over a very long time, where equality was king, and we've got DEI officers all over the place telling us how to be, totally even-handed. I don't think we actually need them. I think our evolution of this country has been positive towards that in every walk of life. I wondered if there are EDI officers in many of these imam camps. I'm sure I'm being somewhat facetious that there are. But you're quite right, Julie. You're saying it in graphic terms that perhaps I wouldn't go to. But the Labour Party has courted the Muslim vote over the years. That Muslim vote is now under threat because of the division in society that we've seen. And we've got a number of independent Islamic MPs now that speak just for that community in parts of the country where the Muslim vote is particularly large. And you do have to worry. I mean, I was a councillor for many years on a big unitary authority in Kent. And if one of my local constituents had come to me with one of these concerns, that their daughter had, faced this type of evil, would I have just turned a cheek? Or would I have gone, I'm afraid I'm not going to leave this. This has got to be looked into at the highest level. I'd have been on to the local police commander and everything else.
Yeah, but that's the difference. We're sharp-elbowed.
Are some of these councillors, probably Labour over the years, I would say almost predominantly Labour, had they turned a blind eye to all this happening? So this is the longer term of what an inquiry could do. Now, we do not need new laws to tell me that raping of young girls is an illegal act.
No, exactly.
New laws
exactly. No one's arguing for that. Can I point out, by the way, that Keir Starmer is at PMQs right now. We're going to get the highlights and play those out in the next 15 minutes or so with Peter Carball. But he has urged Kemi Badenoch to withdraw her, what he calls wrecking amendment to the government's bill. He says aimed at protecting children. And he's also responded to a question from a Labour MP about whether a further inquiry is necessary or not. And the Prime Minister said he'd met with victims this morning. How convenient. And the message from them had been that they wanted action now, not the delay of a further inquiry, which I suppose echoes a lot of what you're saying there. Can I just bring you on, though? You mentioned multicultural issues and things, but it's interesting what we talked about it extensively on the show yesterday. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, had talked about, the grooming gangs and the rape gangs issue had come about because we have millions and more people in this country, and we've imported people from alien cultures, from often cultures where they have medieval attitudes towards women. There's now, calls for us to, basically stop bringing in people who have attitudes like that. Now, I've been arguing this for years. I find it extraordinary that people think it's a good idea to bring people from completely... I mean, I'm sorry, lots of countries are very backwards compared to our values in this country. And unless you're escaping those values and you want to come and live our values here in the West, we have these... I'm with Kemi Badenoch on this one. The superior culture as a Western liberal democracy. I don't believe in multiculturalism, multiracialism. Yeah, multiculturalism, absolutely not. But is it right for the party? I mean, I know it's your party, but you don't necessarily have to stand by everything now as a peer rather than MP. Is it right for us to say maybe there are people we just simply don't want to come here from certain cultures?
No, I echo everything that Robert Jenrick has said, and I'm very pleased that finally, dare I say, he is on a very, very robust track on this, because that is what the people of this country are thinking. Now, of course, Julie, you will say, well, it's my party that allowed millions of people in over the years. Yes, that is absolutely true. And that causes me great embarrassment that happened, and that's something that we need to put right. But those robust statements about some cultures really not wanting to fit in with the culture that they apparently want to join, and seem to want to make this new country that they seem to want to come to the same as the old country that they left for some reason, seems very bizarre to me, and I've never quite managed to understand that. Now, I don't want to highlight one culture over another, but, there are many. I mean, the Buddhist culture, very soft, very respectful, very decent.
Well, actually, have you seen what's happened in countries with a lot of Buddhist populations? I mean, hasn't Myanmar and Sri Lanka had quite a lot of issues? They're Buddhist cultures.
Well,
there isn't any culture that's perfectly good. I mean, we talk about what Christians have done over the years. I mean, but the point is that But there's living in the 21st century and sharing our values, and there isn't living in the 21st century and sharing our values.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I'm a libertarian conservative, as you know, and what people want to pray to and how they want to live indoors, well, that's a matter for them. I really don't mind at all. But in other interactions with the culture they've joined, I expect a little bit more adherence to just some of the values that we have.
Well, I expect a lot more adherence, personally. I want to move on because time's
I don't want to live in a bland world. I quite like, a multiracial economy is fine up to its limits. But I don't like blandness. But I think
there's nothing bland about believing women are equal with men or anything like that. By the way, is there someone in your? Can I just say, is there someone in your office doing some banging? There's quite a lot of background noise. I don't know if someone else in your office is.
That's probably me banging these on the desk.
Right. It's just as quite like just as quite. It's just we're worried for our listeners hearing just noises that are distracting. But can I just ask you two more things I want to ask you about very briefly, if I could, Lord McKinley. The cost of Britain's borrowing hit a 27-year high yesterday. It turns out that the world markets aren't very convinced by chess prodigy and apparently former economist Rachel Reeves' ability to run the economy. The cost of borrowing is now higher than it was when Liz Truss had her emergency mini budget back in 2022, which was so devastating for our economy that apparently she had to go, and so did her Chancellor. Are you concerned about borrowing hitting this high, and what it's going to mean in terms of spending cuts or tax hikes?
I am extremely concerned. I mean, this is like the start of a real pack of cards for a country, unfortunately. We still have a cost of living crisis. We do not have a dynamic economy that is growing. And yet we have interest rates that, in my view, now are far too high. Not only the Bank of England give an interest rate, that's another story. I think they've got I've got their messages wrong. But the markets upon which the government needs to draw to actually finance the growing debt is very unconvinced about the last budget and the way this economy is going. Now, that means that interest has to be paid by the government to those who are providing all that finance and debt, and that rate is now very high. Now, Rachel Reeves' dreadful budget in a few years hence gave a little bit of headroom. So there wasn't much scope for things going off track. Now, this high amount of interest payable was not in the plan, so that off-trackness is very much approaching. Now, I've got two choices on that. She either raises taxes still further and you spiral into an even more moribund economy, because I don't know any economy that grows on the back of tax. I mean, maybe there is one somewhere, but I think it's perhaps in fantasy land or Mars. The alternative is to cut spending. Now, I don't suppose she wants to do that, does she? She's just thrown another 22 billion bucket of cash at the NHS. Don't quite know what they're going to do with it. There's buckets of cash for the union paymasters. Where are we going to get the cuts from? This is coming to crunch time, because rates of interest on the 10-year gilt and especially the 30-year gilt now higher than everybody was shouting up and down on Liz Truss's, what I thought was a growth budget, actually. They're all shouting up and down, the IMF, the BBC, Bank of England, everybody, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, saying this is all dreadful and horrible. I didn't hear them saying very much just now, but they should be.
Oh, absolutely. Just finally, really briefly, if we would, we've learned from Mark Zuckerberg that he's going to get rid of the fact checkers. It turns out fact checkers on Facebook and Instagram, just like those ones on Twitter and X, it turns out they're all very political and they're not often getting it right. You're someone who has spoken out so strongly on anti-lockdown, on COVID, on vaccine mandates, and indeed on climate change and the madness of net zero. Massive censorship on all of these different social media by supposedly the fact checkers telling us that we're wrong about all of this stuff, when actually the facts prove us right. So why are the fact checkers always coming from one political persuasion rather than any other?
Well, it's one of the reasons I was concerned about the online harms bill. It was likely to make the online giants actually become more cautious about what is printed, because they want to stay the right side of UK law. Now, I'm not sure you can ever do that with such a nebulous thing like social media and the internet, but that's a separate aside. But no, I was very welcome to hear Meta's Zuckerberg yesterday, saying that he's going to, reduce the number of fact checkers and all of these type of bots that are meant to keep us safe online. I don't know whether it's because it's just so huge, whether it requires so many staff and bots that they can't really cope with it. I do worry about that. So is this profitability or not? But I very much welcome that we're going to have less of it. But you're quite right, Julia. How come it is when you've got BBC Fact Check or Verify or whatever it's called, it always seems to be on the side of the woke and the left and all of those things that you and I fight against every day of the week.
Yeah, it's never neutral. And again, if it's not neutral, then it's not a fact check.
Well, it came to a bizarre point when I've had colleagues in the House of Commons have had their feed into YouTube actually cancelled because it's deemed, not acceptable to the bots.
That's what happened to us. Exactly. And again, there was no disinformation, no misinformation. There was just discussions with medical experts. God forbid we should have done that during a pandemic, eh? Lord Craig McKinley, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining Conservative peer Craig McKinley. I'm going to take a quick break now. It's 12:22. Up next, we'll hear from Benedict Spence, and we'll take more of your calls on lots of big topics we've been talking about. Don't forget to put a call in if you want to have your say. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
All this is brand new to Musk. If I'd never heard of it before, I would be fizzing.
You would be.
Fizzing. Steam would be coming out of all my orifices.
Absolutely.
And I sympathise with his rage because I've felt that rage. Now, I admit, because we've read about it, we've known since Andrew Norfolk, since Sue Reed, since other people, since Anne Cryer, that this has been going on. We've almost become blunted to the sheer horror of it.
Yes.
But now the rest of the world sees. And as I say, I don't just want an inquiry. I want a formal apology.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 26, it's just turning into. Benedict Spence is with me. It's interesting to talk to Craig McKinney about all of this. And we're just going to get, before we get to some calls, and we're going to talk about PMQs, we're going to get some clips of what's the exchanges, particularly between the PM and Kemi Badenoch. And then they've really gone, head to head on the issue of the grooming scandal and the rape gangs and whether or not there should be a full inquiry. And now, I mean, Lord McKinley's, he makes a very fair point, like a task force, some sort of action, and there's something that Keir Starmer has said doing PMQs, saying he met with victims this morning, again, conveniently, and they want action now. There is a worry about an inquiry. It costs loads of money, it takes 7 years, and nothing actually happens. And again, as we saw with the Alexis J inquiry, barely touched on grooming scandal, and no action for more than 2 years on it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily trust this government to put in place an inquiry that would go down the relevant sort of routes, and it might, in fact, just be used for political grandstanding, which is, of course, what happened with the COVID inquiry.
Or long grassing.
Yeah, and this is, I'm afraid, a habit that successive British governments like to do, but that's because we have a culture of covering things up in this country. People seem to think that we are sort of very transparent. We're not. We're the exact opposite, where we double down on scandals and try to obfuscate where possible. The other thing to remember, of course, is lots of politicians, lots of civil servants, all sorts of people, police officers, social workers from all kinds of political backgrounds could theoretically be asked to give evidence, could be implicated. We don't know the true scale. It just seems to be an awful lot bigger. So you can understand, therefore, why there would be a reluctance for there to actually hold one. If there are that many people potentially who are going to be embarrassed by this, I'm not saying have done anything wrong,
of the argument.
But just embarrassed, you can understand, therefore, why the wheels of the state might start to grind a little bit, try to hold the thing up, and therefore why, even if we did have an inquiry, it might not find anything that we actually hope they would, because it is in a lot of powerful people's interest to go, I don't want to be embarrassed by this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's go to the phone lines and let's have a listen and look to what you want to say about all the other topics. Let's go to Andrew, who is in Hertfordshire. Very good morning, afternoon to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Julia and Benedict. Look, in relation to the grooming gangs and what's happening today in Parliament, remember, as they're debating this, there are young girls that are actually at this moment being abused. So we need action, and it's Robert Maxwell which really is the root cause of many of the problems in relation to inquiries.
Yeah, the Maxwellisation of it all. Yeah, explain to people who don't know what happened as as a result.
So basically what Maxwell did was every time there was an inquiry into him, he demanded that the evidence that was given, he had a right to reply before it was published, and that elongated everything. So that's why all our public inquiries take so long. And if you look at, say there's one witness and it's just Julia, you and me, unfortunately that's lawyers, that's time, exchanging the information. That's why ours take forever. Yeah. Now, in relation to this whole scandal, Jess Phillips playing the Meghan Markle role, it's all about me. And yes, she was given a hard time by Musk. Yeah. The reality is that when the Conservatives are in power, if they wanted to end this, between them and resolving this were Labour governments and Labour schools run by Labour teachers. And so what happened in reality was there was no way that they could get the traction. But luckily, they are not in power anymore. So now, daylight, being the best disinfectant, is now thrown all over the Labour Party. And right from the top to the bottom, they can't defend that they were supportive of covering this up from the top to the bottom. And if you look at Starmer, remember, he's a lawyer from before they stopped councils really digging into rape victims, saying it was their fault. So his mentality, he has gone into court and cross-examined females and told them that they played up to the bloke.
That's his job. That is his job when you are actually a lawyer. I mean, I never castigate people for that. Here's the thing: Andrew Norfolk, the Times journalist who broke this story, I think it was 2012. He has actually done an interview and he said, he's now retired, saying that when people criticising Keir Starmer, he says, to be fair, he was the one who, yes, he'd been DPP since 2008, but there were lots of grooming scandals that were not investigated. Charges weren't brought because the view was that the victims, well, they were young lasses who were were on drink and drugs. They weren't very credible. Juries wouldn't believe them. The CPS wouldn't want to prosecute. He was when he changed the rules and they went back and did a whole load of prosecutions as a result of that. And he was the one who put Nasir Afzal in charge, who did the first big prosecution. So he was actually quite defending the now Prime Minister, saying, actually, he wasn't part of the problem, he was part of the solution, I think was a summary of what he was saying.
Yeah, but that was then and this is now, and disinfectant is fallen upon Starmer. And remember, we vilify people that supply arms to Gaza, and we call them murderers.
I don't.
No, I know, but people do. And in the court of public opinion, as Harriet Harman used to say, Starmer actually... this is under his watch. Because if he was in charge, he'd have kept looking at this and he'd have driven through change. But he didn't. It just was a piece of paper on his desk.
Yeah, and it was interesting also, I think it was under Sajid Javid when they'd actually introduced, or was it under Rishi Sunak, but there were basically 500 more men charged over these rape gangs as a result of a special sort of police squad going in and actually, looking at all these cases again. Really interesting points, Andrew. So much appreciate your call. But that's true, isn't it, the Maxwellisation, this whole thing, you have an inquiry, these things take absolutely ages. And it always seems to me they operate on such a slow, just plodding basis.
But they are a reflection of British political culture now. Everything is like that. Everything has to be elongated because there are so many special, interests, special reasons for doing these things. And we understand why. A lot of this has come about in the interest of fairness. You don't want a kangaroo court situation where actually people are just sort of...
They point the finger at someone and they haven't had a chance to respond. That's
a show
reasonable.
trial actually does happen across the world. We need to recognise we do actually have, in many ways, a fantastic legal system, but it has, on many things, gone too far.
Well, again, apart from the fact that, some of these cases, when they do come to trial, we're talking at 4 or 5 years.
As much as anything, that's a capacity issue because we don't have the courts anymore because the Tories
closed. If you write a hurty tweet, that's on the Tories. That is on the Tories, no question. But that said, again, there was austerity imposed in the 2010s. Why? because we had a banking crisis.
True.
Why? Because the former Prime Minister and Chancellor Gordon Brown had deregulated the banking system in the UK. No, I mean, it's a plague on both of their houses.
It is.
Everything that's gone wrong.
It is, but I would just like to pick up on the other thing that you said, because a lot of the suggestion is that this hasn't been talked about entirely in the name of community relations. I think we shouldn't get away from the fact that, as you picked up on, it was the attitude taken towards these poor working-class girls. They're off the rails, they're not credible, they don't matter. It was as much about that as it was, we don't want to upset the community. It is, these people are effectively garbage. There's no hope for them. What are you going to do? A jury's not going to believe
Unless you're a virgin and a vicar's daughter, we're not going to take your case seriously. And again, that's attitudes of our system towards young women as well.
Working-class young girls were seen as completely unbelievable and dispensable. Nothing has really changed in the last century, it turns out.
Well, now we just add in working-class boys as well.
Oh,
and again, we had, that's the reality, isn't it?
Well, they're the ones that are killing themselves at a disproportionate rate, and again, nobody seems to care about that.
No, absolutely. Let's go to another quick call before we go to a break, and then we're going to be hearing from Peter Cardwell about more detail what happened at pmqs. Ben is in Essex, and Ben, you wanted to talk about Donald Trump. What do you want to say?
Yeah, good afternoon, Julie. Yeah, I was listening to your comments, and I quite enjoyed Trump's speech.
I loved it. It was great fun.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's refreshing to see someone leading their country with backbone and determination. I mean, why Trump can be a bit polarising and, might be wrong or right, whatever you may say. Look at Keir Starmer, who can lead a puppy.
But here's the thing. What you just said about Trump, say that about Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping as well.
Exactly. I mean,
that's not a good thing.
Well, the thing is, you need someone that's going to represent and lead. And in this country, we are begging for someone to lead with...
tell me about it.
British values. And while I get the American Constitution slightly different to British values, at least he's standing up there to represent and, we are going to sort of push forward. And
I like him saying he's going to put America first. That's his job. I love it if we put Britain first occasionally.
Without a doubt. I mean, the thing is, whenever Starmer gets questioned about stuff look at the grooming gangs that the people want and need for our country and what's right, he calls us all far right.
Yeah.
And I think we are absolutely begging for someone to stand up in office like that and say what you want to Trump, but I like him, and I just hope that he rattles Starmer and has some sort of influence. I mean, look at Zuckerberg back foot.
Totally. Down on his knees, isn't he? I mean, goodness me. There is that aspect of Donald Trump, quite apart from the entertainment aspect, that I very much enjoy and admire, and wrong-footing people. And I do like that. Again, I'm just not sure. I want an American president taking leaf out of the Putin playbook. But there we are. I do get your point. And I've got to be honest with you, it's going to be so miserable and ghastly under Keir Starmer here for the next 4.5 years. We're going to need a bit of Trump to keep us cheered cleared up. Ben, thank you so much for your call. Right, it's 12:35. We're going to take a quick break. Then Peter Cardwell's going to be here with some clips. Going to find out what happened at PMQs, because you know the rules. He watches it, so we don't have to. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. With me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:38 is the time. Benedict Spencer's still with me. And now we're delighted to say to be joined by Peter Cardwell, Talk presenter and, of course, political commentator. He's been watching PMQ, so we don't have to go through the whole... I mean, it's still ongoing now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I mean, I've really had some high hopes they're going to get it back to me just half an hour. I like the Prime Minister's being held to account, but it doesn't half drag on. Let's talk about what obviously would be the big issue. I mean, we know already Kemi Badenoch did raise what everyone expected to do, the issue of this rape grooming gangs scandal, and whether or not there should be a full inquiry. There's going to be a vote later in Parliament on that. So how did those exchanges go? I imagine not particularly smoothly and calmly on both sides.
All 6 questions on rape gangs, as Kemi Badenoch would call them, grooming gangs, as Keir Starmer would call them. Very angry, kind of almost very menacingly serious in terms of what they were talking about. He talked about her record on this as well. Very, very interesting in that regard. Jess Phillips sitting 2 away from Keir Starmer, making lots of comments, throwing comments across, pointing out that the recommendations from the Professor Alexis Jay report, the big report that happened previously, that the Conservatives in 18 months didn't implement any of them.
Fair point.
The Conservatives saying, well, you've had 6 months, you're saying you're working at pace, why haven't you implemented them yet? But still, war of words about that. This is really nasty today. This is really, I think, Parliament at a bad point as well. I very much detect, even quite apart from this being such a very, very, difficult and emotional issue, that actually these two people really don't like each other. No,
Shall we
don't.
have any watch and a listen of the first clip? This is what they had to say.
Once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said we can do 2 things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children.
Oh, right. I think we were actually supposed to play a different clip before then. We've got a bit of a problem with our tech there.
This was towards the end of PMQs,
right,
where Keir Starmer really summed up what he was saying in all of the different aspects, essentially saying, why are the Conservatives jumping on this bandwagon? And he was very, very personal against Kemi Badenoch, saying that she hadn't raised it as Children's Minister, she hadn't raised it as Women and Equalities Minister. Why
so
was
it was
she raising it
within her remit to raise it. Now, she's raised lots of other big issues. I mean, she's spoken. I've been a big fan of Kemi Badenoch for a long time, and I know there's been a lot of Tory members. Well, they voted for her to be leader.
She mentioned the Tavistock stuff, for example.
She came out on the group on all the scandals involving, you know, the so-called trans kids. No such thing as a trans kid. You know, but she's spoken out on a lot of issues, which, you know, other MPs, you know, tiptoed around, and it is surprising, and it's a fair argument for her to say, like, you know, you're politicking on this, but it's a perfectly fair argument for Keir Starmer to hit back and say the same to her.
Yes, it is, and certainly he is saying that, you know, Elon Musk has had 200 tweets since Christmas, mainly about British politics, specifically about grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them, and essentially Keir Starmer saying, you're jumping on the bandwagon here, you didn't care about this previously, this wasn't an issue until Elon Musk brought it up, therefore why do you care now? And they've got this big bill this afternoon, the Children and Wellbeing Bill, which has a lot of different provisions in it. We're talking about changes to the national curriculum, for example, various different issues, including child protection as well. The Conservatives are putting forward a wrecking amendment, essentially saying they want an inquiry into this specifically.
But that vote isn't going to pass. Labour are going to block it. Again, this is really, and again, this is where the politicking comes in, because Labour have a massive majority. They're 170, slightly less as working majority. They can basically block anything, in which case there is that argument that this is just so you can have something on your election leaflets, perhaps in, you know, local areas. We're told that some 50 towns and cities across Britain where grooming gangs are still happening, saying, look, your local MP voted against having an inquiry. Now, the Prime Minister said that he did say he'd met with victims this morning. Again, whenever they do it that morning, you know, it's always a bit of a give. Oh, I wonder how that came about. He says they want action now, and the trouble with things like inquiries, it wouldn't report until maybe the start of the next decade, would delay things to 2031. And again, these things don't have to take this long. I mean, Craig McKinley, the Tory peer, he was on in the last half hour talking about how, you know, what about a task force, something that, let's get action, let's deal with not only the people who haven't been prosecuted yet, but also the people who turned a blind eye. I mean, that's kind of a middle ground I think more people would be happy with.
Well, the interesting thing is that we've had these local inquiries in places like Telford, Oldham have been asking for one, but the question is, should there be a sort of national inquiry? I actually spoke to the guy who'd done the Telford one on Friday, a really interesting KC, who said actually you can go to victims and survivors' homes, you can have a cup of tea with them and talk to them in a non-adversarial way, get the information and talk about what's happening locally. The question for a national inquiry, much more adversarial, much more courtroom-esque, and also...
And it's the lawyers who benefit the most.
Well, exactly, and can take a very long time as well. So, I mean, Keir Starmer saying the Alexis J report took 7 years. It mentioned Rotherham once, and Kemi Badenoch pointed that out. And, you know, this wasn't an inquiry into grooming gangs per se.
This is the thing.
This is a wider inquiry.
This is the thing, exactly. But again, not implemented anyway. I mean, which is extraordinary. One of the lines that Kemi Badenoch used, actually, I'm so unfortunate we haven't got the clip, was saying that he urging the Prime Minister to be a leader, not a lawyer.
That's right.
And that is... But that's a really strong line in terms of, a lot of people feel that, but he approaches everything, you know, as a lawyer. Like, you know, whether it's international affairs, whether it's you know, horrific crimes like this, everything. You know, you can just hear the voice, can't you?
And he has said, he has pointed to his record, saying that he has pushed this issue many times. He said that he was the chief prosecutor when the Rochdale grooming gangs were prosecuted, for example, and that he pushed that.
But he was also the chief prosecutor when the Rochdale gangs weren't prosecuted for 4 or 5 years.
Many years,
That's the thing. So there's a view that he has done a good job. You know, when he actually got on top of this, he changed the rules, he allowed, you know, these things to go ahead. But for many years they didn't. Well, he was in charge then as well.
And Kemi Badenoch pointed that out and said, look, you can do two things at once. You can implement the the Professor Alexis J recommendations, the 20 recommendations. That can be done whilst having a more focused inquiry into what is happening with rape gangs still within various parts of England.
Absolutely.
And there was a very compelling part where she said, actually, later on today, Keir Starmer is going to be asking people, his own MPs in various areas, including Derby, Oldham, various other places, to vote against this inquiry. inquiry, which is a very compelling piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting you mentioned the Home Office Minister, Jess Phillips, who's kind of sparked this whole new row. She's safeguarding minister. Now, to be fair, she has a very long track record of working, helping women, fighting, domestic violence and on violence against women and girls. She does like to emote, and everything with Jess Phillips is about Jess Phillips and Jess Phillips' feelings a lot of the time, but I think she has been unfairly targeted by Elon Musk, and he called her a rape genocide apologist, and she should be in jail. She's not those things, and again, I particularly hate people using the word genocide when it's not appropriate. Someone has done the old historics of this, because there is always a tweet, isn't there? And she's spoken out about, she's had death threats. I mean, she has to have massive levels of security now. That is outrageous. I don't care what anyone's politics are. That is outrageous and unacceptable. There's sort of language being used against her. Again, that said, so he does that sort of language against her. That doesn't make me make a death threat against her. So the people who are doing this stuff, it's on them as far as I'm concerned. Yes. But what a surprise. She has used this sort of language herself on Twitter. She's quite happy to tell people to pee off and F off and goodness knows what on Twitter. Personally, I'm a fan of this sort of plain speaking, as you know. But in a tweet 2015, she said, "Today I saw George Galloway on the beach. I told him he was a rape apologist." Another thing ticked off the bucket list. In 2015, she also tweeted to Philip Davies, MP, Conservative MP, "Funny, Philip Davies not so interested in retweeting the evidence of violent sexist abuse. He was American and..." I don't know who he's talking about here. I'm referred to someone as a vile rape apologist. I think I can live with my comments. She referred to someone else as a rape apologist.
The thing with Jess
Phillips,
she
uses a lot of the same language.
She does. Jess Phillips has been through a really tough time in the last few days. That is nothing, as she pointed out yesterday in an interview, nothing in comparison to the women and girls, and they are girls who have been through these horrendous things.
Absolutely.
The point with this is that government is really, really difficult. It is difficult to do things and please people and get results. And in opposition is frustrating for many people. It's frustrating because you don't have any power, but it's also easy because you can basically say what you want. And we have a situation where Labour, on a number of fronts, whether it's the WASPy women, whether it's the winter fuel allowance, whatever it is, they are in a situation with this inquiry where they've called for things to happen. They haven't happened in opposition. They're now in government. You're it. You're it.
Tough.
Sort it out.
I think Labour have genuinely been quite stunned about quite how hard it is to be in office. What a surprise. Just to say, also, Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, he asked Keir Starmer, when he got up to speak, to bring in reforms to party funding. So he says, power in this country lies with voters and not with Elon Musk. Of course, this related to that Elon Musk had originally said, of course, that he would give up to $100 million, we understand, to the Reform Party. Keir Starmer replied, "I think we all had a smile when," and he's referring to Farage, when he said how cool it was to have the support of Musk, only for Musk to say he should be removed. It's very difficult, this one, isn't it? I don't want anyone being able to make big donations to political parties, but if we didn't have people doing that, then, it wouldn't, reform wouldn't have so much help. Taxpayers would pay for it. Well, again, also, but then smaller parties wouldn't get a leg up because as we saw with the Electoral Commission, there are rules at the last election limiting how much, like Nigel Farage didn't get to have, even though he had much more support than some other parties, didn't get to be on some of the podiums in some of the leaders' debates. But, I mean, there is quite a lot of schadenfreude going on in the Commons, isn't there, over this?
Yeah, there certainly is, and Elon Musk has sent, as I say, over 200 different tweets about this. He's taken on Keir Starmer, he's taken on Jess Phillips, he's taken on, or the inclination. But what I find interesting, I don't know about you, Julia, saying, who is this international person? What does he know about British politics? Well, I've never been to Afghanistan, but I've plenty of opinions about what happened there.
Yeah, that said, Elon Musk seems to be supremely uninformed about our parliamentary
democracy. Although, did you know, random fact, his first wife, her father was the head of National Crime Squad.
That is a random fact.
Yeah.
Well played.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. You learned something. Listen, you learned something. Well, when Peter's here. Oh, and Benedict speaking as well. Benedict, I'm sorry we didn't get to play all the clips, but just a quick thought on what that exchange at PMQs. From the sound of it, who do you think won?
I think Kemi Bay not won, but it was a slightly larger open goal than normal, and she does have a bit of a track record of missing the open goals when there, so I'm not sure she gets kudos for that. But, this is something that is going to keep rumbling, and I don't think it's going to cover either party in glory. No. So a win, but at what cost?
Yeah, you didn't do it, you're not doing it again. That's the thing. I mean, fundamentally, I don't know how long it will last on the financial front, but certainly on the policy front, I think the Tories are going to have to face a lot of years of Yeah, but you didn't do it when you were in power. Great to have you in the studio, Peter Cole. Thank you very much indeed. Up next, we are going to be talking about the California wildfires. They've been leading every other media organisation because apparently we were terribly worried about 30,000 people on the other side of the country losing their homes to fire. It's probably because they think it's down to climate change. But is it? You know the answer to that. This is Talk.
Kemi Badenoch so far has been a disaster. Kemi, if you're watching, stop saying what you're going to do. You've been in the job a couple of months. You haven't done anything. Do something. Stop saying you're going to... You wait. We're really going to take Labour on. You wait. No, we don't want to wait. Get on with it.
It's all platitudes and headlines, isn't it? You know, I had this debate when I was hosting a week or two ago, and I said to Peter Barnes, I think, look, we need to see Kemi Badenoch's mettle. We need to know what she actually stands for.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Well, if you've made the mistake, and I know sometimes you do, and I'm sorry about that, you might click the wrong button on the radio or online. You've actually seen some of the mainstream media today. You all know that the leading story today is all about 30,000 people, largely very well-to-do Californians, probably some very well-known celebs, having to leave their homes because of California wildfires. That is apparently what should be leading the news today, if you're mainstream media. I'm not entirely sure it is, but I wanted to talk about it because I'm pretty sure that you're going to be hearing the same thing I have, which is, well, of course, it's all down to climate change, even though, of course, it's winter in California, though still warm, certainly not the sort of high temperatures we expect and associate with wildfires. Well, let's talk about this with Ben Pyle. He's writer and co-founder at Climate Debate UK. Very good afternoon to you, Ben.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. As always, whenever there's any sort of natural disaster of any sort, wildfires, floods, drought, wind, rain, snow, whatever it is, it's always due to climate change. Are these dreadful fires due to climate change?
Oh, well, probably not. And you would have to be inhuman to not sympathise with the obvious terror and suffering that those fires cause. And that's obviously why they're attractive to a lot of people in, let's say, more disreputable media than this platform. But no, as much as people have tried to say that wildfires in California or in the world are the result of climate change and global warming, there's simply very little evidence to support that. California is a particular, it's quite arid, it often is very dry, even in the winter, and it is subject to high winds. So, and there's quite a lot of wood around. So when a fire does break out, which is a very natural part of a forest's life cycle.
Yeah.
When the first settlers landed in California, they took the measures of burning parts of the forest. It's called prescribed burning. This became, in most parts of the world, this is completely normal, because as the leaves and detritus fall off trees, they build up on the forest floor, and then as soon as a lightning spark hits them, or if there's an accident from electricity infrastructure, or someone.
As a barbecue, and then everything gets like. And we've seen this across the country, haven't we? And again, most of these fires now are man-made; they're human caused, accidentally or not. But the interesting thing is, countries like in America, particularly woke states like California, they've stopped doing these regular burns for eco reasons, to be all environmental. And then what a surprise! They get these natural fires because there's going to be a fire at some point.
That's right. That's certainly true. The forest management is one issue. The other part is the scrubland, and it turns out 100% by some scientist estimates of fires that break out in scrubland or shrubland are man-made in one way or another. That's either electricity infrastructure failures or arsonists. And it's the same, in fact, in the UK. Half of fires in Britain are estimated to be started deliberately. But when there are fires that break out in hot weather, or the routine for the media is to look at climate change as the obvious
and we've had that in Australia, and again there was something, it's been terrible in Australia, and fires that got close to Sydney a few years ago. But again, actually the number of fires and the amount of damage done by fires, the actual coverage of them was less than a normal average year. We saw it with Hawaii, and it turned out again they hadn't been managing the land. This story comes up again and again and again, and yet they always just, at the end of every report, well, we're going to see more of this due to climate change. Do you think it's ever going to stop? Do you think they'll ever let the facts get in the way?
Well, I think they've had to do a lot of science abuse and statistics abuse to cover this. I mean, it's very clear. If you look at the satellite data from NASA, and they admit it themselves, there's been a substantial reduction globally in the area burned by wildfire. So what the Greens sort of answer to this is to say that the risk of fire weather, which is dry and windy weather, has increased. That's say that there's more of this kind of weather.
They'll always twist it. They'll always twist it. I mean, again, you don't see that on the BBC, do you? I'm going to have to leave it there. Time is against us. Ben Powell, I hope you come back and join us again soon. Writer and co-founder at Climate Debate UK. Fantastic follow on social media, by the way. Benedict, I mean, they will never, ever stop this. But every single report I've seen, they always get climate change into it.
They won't. And in California, they have some of the wokest, maddest, most progressive policies of anywhere on earth. And I just think if doing that, my home kept on catching fire as frequently as it does, I'd assume God was trying to send me a message that he wasn't happy with how it was going.
He may be thinking that veganism and trans kids aren't a good thing. That's what he's saying. Anyway, I mean, my heart goes out to people losing their homes. But I mean, guys, you can do something about this. Right then, Ian Collins is